Thank you for that. Hey, good morning, everyone. I'll dispense with the formal narrative. You just heard that yesterday. You may commence.
Thank you.
Like administrivia, and then we'll do real stuff. The meeting is being recorded, so you know that. In the room, working with the owls, if you speak towards the funny looking owl thing, it picks up your voice a little better. If we start having trouble, there is a backup way to handle audio in here. And Ryan can help us if we have to go there. If you're,
Yes, please let us know in the chat if you start having audio issues and we'll switch it expeditiously.
We do have Plan B and we know it works. If you're in the room, we want to collect your autograph on the sign-in sheet over here as you come in. There is a donut bribe for collecting autographs, courtesy of Ryan. Also copies of the agenda, the presentation, the rap sheet, and the minutes from last meeting. Restrooms are out here and back over my shoulder. Water fountains are there too. If you need a snack, Ryan or somebody from Ecology can escort you back to their lunchroom. It's behind the door. So make sure you've signed in and have an Ecology badge. That's how they keep track of who's in the building. If we need to get out quickly, we meet out in the parking lot, right?
Yeah.
We're not planning on doing that, but in case we have to, that's what we would do. Did I miss anything, Ryan?
I don't think so. Just again, a reminder to the people in the room, really watch the cross chatter. Even if you're like whispering to each other, the owl can and will pick you up and it will show what you're sharing and also he's like presenting or answering a question. So save that cross chatter for the breaks.
I think even typing, like just little noises that affect everything.
Okay, so type lightly. All right. Mr. Chair. Okay, you fell for it, Tom. Tom.
We now have a row of Toms. And there's one more Tom to come, and I don't think he's going to be sitting at the table.
We can invite him.
Look up there. Today we're going to be having election. Term for committee chair and vice chair is 1 year. Just wrapping up my second term, and it's going to be a good day for elections. We have 324 building update, which is a critical project for the region and for the site, and really appreciate DOE supporting that discussion. We're going to have a informal discussion with Ecology and EPA, talking about what else is out there, understanding that DOE is not here to answer questions or address concerns we might have. Maybe we could give Gary a list of things to follow up on if something comes up. And then we're going to have a presentation from Chris Sutton on the cleanup priorities advice for the year. Every committee has a chance to weigh in and add their own flair. I have added some stuff for RAP, but there might be more that we missed. I'm on the IM team on behalf of RAP. Then we got lunch, and after lunch we're going to have open forum. And for those of you who are new, open forum is a space where you can talk about anything you want as long as it's related to Hanford. If there's something in the tank waste committee you heard that you think might apply to RAP, or you don't think it applies to RAP, but you just want people to know about it, you can, have the podium and talk. It's not we don't usually take action out of open forum, although sometimes the idea for an issue manager team will come out of it. Committee business, we're going to be looking at topics for the June meeting. And I'm going to put in a shameless plug because in the June meeting, we're going to be looking at the RAP's contribution to next year's work plan for the HAB. So put on your thinking hats and come ready in June for some ideas about what you think the RAP should talk about next year. And if we need to, if we can get through everything quicker, then we can leave before 2:30, but we have that as sort of a hard stop. How'd I do?
Oh, very well. Questions about the agenda and what we're doing today?
Did anybody have a chance to read over the meeting minutes that facilitation put together?
I did.
Yes.
Any questions or comments or objections or?
Looks good.
Yeah, I think it's a really well written summary, so good job. So let's approve those. And then the other thing that was in your meeting invite is the document that I've been working on for the past 5 or 6 meetings, the RAP sheet, where it's not officially sanctioned by anybody. It's just me reading the administrative record and giving you some thoughts. So there's the disclaimer on that. If you have questions about it, the links are on there so you can read the documents, and I'd love to chat about whatever's on there. And now we're only 8 minutes ahead of time.
Oh, darn.
Do we need to do a consensus approval for the minutes?
No, this meeting minutes for the committees are less formal than meeting minutes for the full board, which is, but since I didn't hear any comments, one last call, anybody?
Actually, as a matter of just process and what is written down on a piece of paper,
Yeah.
and we missed this for a long time, guys, so that's my fault. Is it in the operating ground rules or the process manual? I can't remember which document. It basically says that the chairs of the committees and the chair of the board certify the accuracy of the minutes. And we've been doing it as a group exercise for a long time. So if you all don't have comments or concerns, and we certainly would fix them if you had them, you, as the chair of the committee, are empowered to certify the minutes and say, yep, they're done, and then we post them on the website.
I would still lean towards
Yeah.
what you just did, which was ask if anybody had any questions, comments, changes.
That's the best practice.
And at that point, I would then, say, then it may not be an approval, a vote, but you're certifying based on the fact that you've already validated that there's no, you're not doing it all on yourself.
I think that's the right thing to do. Anyone online, the other half of the meeting, you're included. So if you have seen the meeting minutes in your packet and you have comments, Chris, you got your hand up.
I have a suggestion for inclusion on your rap sheet.
I think we've got time, and that's sort of rap sheets on the agenda item. So yeah, let's add it.
Every month or every other month, in the administrative record, the 100 and 300 area unit managers minutes are published. And then as a separate document, the 200 area unit managers meetings are published. And those give a really good updated summary of what's discussed between DOE, EPA, and ecology about the various operable units all along Central Plateau and River. That might be something that would be worth including on your rap sheet.
It's a great idea. And those are typically a couple months behind.
They are.
Yeah, but yeah, I can definitely put those in forward. Thank you.
I found the rap sheet very helpful in terms of providing background and depth on the issues. So.
Great, thank you. Okay, so seeing nothing in the chat from folks who have, well, I can't see the chat. Is there anyone in chat saying anything about the meeting minutes?
I am not seeing anything.
All right, so let's go ahead and approve those and,
We have 17 people logged in, just so that's like almost as many of you who are also with us.
All right, do we want to move into election early, or do we want to introduce ourselves around the room?
Whatever you would like to do, Mr. Chair. Lacey's ready to do whatever you want to do.
I kind of have just an incidental thing to
Yeah.
bring up here. Here this last bit of the year, I received this report from Ecology on the plug and play program.
Yep.
The people saw it. I'd like to call attention to it, the fact that this is working. This is a great accomplishment that they're doing. And I really want everybody to take a look at what they've managed to clean up administratively, including the plug and play approach. So they go find something, they analyze it, determine whether it fits within the rod, and then they say it's plugged right in, and we don't have to go through extra stuff to do it. So I encourage everybody to take a look at this note here, and this is a significant accomplishment, I think, between Ecology and DOE. So my hat's off to them on this. Energies, okay.
Yeah, we worked with them on it, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you mentioned it. No, so, but anyway, people.
I think that came out, didn't that go on?
December 22.
Did it go out in the head blast?
Yes, it must have, because I saw it.
Last week or so. So yeah, we
Okay.
we'll note in the minutes to link to that.
Yeah. Mike Birkenbaugh, did I see your hand up?
That was a mistake.
I don't have anybody in queue.
Okay.
I've got people signing in, but nobody in queue.
So I guess let's move on to elections.
Ms. Vacy.
Okay. We have Tom Cecilia and Larry Haler, and we have one nominee for vice chair, and that is also Larry Haler. So I would just invite the candidates if they want to make a statement. Tom, do you want to go first?
Sure. I've been chair of the RAP for 2 years now. And I believe, looking back, this is my second or third in-person meeting. So I've been chair from my basement, which is sort of a really weird thing. I think it's good to be seeing faces and big faces on walls. And having conversations with new people I've never met, even though I've been meeting you virtually online for the past 2 years. I think there's a lot of good work we're doing, and there's a lot of good work to continue doing, and I'm willing to put in the time to make sure that work gets done.
Thank you so much. Larry, would you like to make a statement? Larry, you're muted. Larry,
Larry?
you're on mute.
Thank you very much. I had originally put my name in for consideration for chair of this committee, but because of my situation with COVID and the ease with which I could take COVID, I prefer to remain as vice chair and attend the meetings in remote. I'm very susceptible to catching COVID, even though I've had all my shots. I don't know what's going on, but I prefer to stay as vice chair if that's possible.
Thank you. It's safe, so thank you. So I guess that will conclude the voting. Does anybody have any questions for the candidates?
I'm gonna mute everyone.
Now we're on mute.
Okay, that's because Ryan understands. Okay. So if you are online with us, you will have to unmute yourself to speak. We were trying to clear out some background noise.
Yeah, so I guess that will, I mean, since Larry has decided to be vice chair, I guess we won't do any voting. So.
Well, no, we need to ask if it's acceptable with the group.
Oh, yes, yes. So is everybody in agreement that Tom Cecilia is the chair and Larry is the vice chair?
Yes.
Yes.
We all in agreement?
Online,
Yes,
are you if you're in agreement, let us know in the chat.
Yeah, here we go. Chat.
I am not seeing any opposition. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. I hope to keep fighting for the rep or whatever iteration we become in the future.
Is it charm or fluid?
Harm, that's the new thing. So I guess now would be a good time, since we have 15 minutes before our briefer gets here, to talk about what happened at the committee of the whole yesterday, if you weren't there. A good group of folks came out and did some really good work. The recommendation that's being made to the operations work group, which will then be made to the EIC in consideration of the full board in April, is that there's a committee somewhat similar to the RAP, but known as cleanup and risk mitigation. And the general idea is that leadership of the committees that are currently chartered will carry over to the new committees, which would start up in October. So watch this space more, and in April we'll have a more formal briefing and with some more details. But there will be still work being done on the river and plateau, just under a different name. So I'm out of things to fill the next 12 minutes.
You should let Tom know there's a clump of Toms.
Yeah, Tom, all the Toms are here, but you don't have to join us.
It's good to know.
But you are welcome to come to the table. You do not have to sit in the corner.
I'm used to it.
Okay.
I'll face the wall next.
All right.
So do we want to take a break, or are you interested in presenting early?
I think some people looking at their eyes need a break.
Okay,
And then I'll be ready to present.
let's take 10 minutes.
All right. Please be back at 9:30. There are copies of Mr. Tanner's presentation in the room, hard copies. If you are online, we post the presentations online on the Hanford.gov website. So, yes, you can find them. Did they get posted this morning? Do we know? We have to send them to the webmaster to get them posted, so there's sometimes a little bit of a lag.
And they're attached to the meeting invite as well.
Well, we didn't, not the presentation.
Okay.
The presentation wasn't in the meeting invite. But if it is not up on Hanford.gov, it will be shortly. It is.
Before I interrupted introductions, remember I interrupted them. If you want to continue with the introductions.
Oh, around the room?
Yeah, because.
Let's do that after this briefing, because we're at 9:30, and we want to keep to the agenda as best we can.
Okay.
But I do want to welcome Tom Tanner from DOE to talk about 324 and the important work that's being done there.
I'll take that as my cue. Good morning, and thank you for having me to come talk about the 324 building, which is just north of here, and it is a top priority for the Department of Energy. Next slide, please. This is what I plan to brief today, just a quick status of where we're at and what we found and a path forward. Next slide, please. Building stabilization. Last October, we finished the structural support underneath the D cell, where the sump was that leaked, the contamination to the soil. The 13 micropiles, considered like pedestals placed underneath the building to hold it up so that when we dig out the waste site underneath it, it won't subside down and provide structural support. And that was completed successfully in October. And what we're also doing now too is a horizontal stabilization. The B cell door is extremely heavy, and we're worried about where the cell is. That's where the horizontal bore holes are going in to provide soil support underneath that to prevent that door from coming cocked, then not being able to open in and out from off the airlock. Where we are right now, is that the soil stabilization, let me touch on that and I'll go into more what we found underneath the building. The soil stabilization, what we're doing is in room 18 and room 131, which are outside of the actual hot cell itself, we're putting vertical boreholes in, and the purpose there is to develop basically a screen to hold the soil back from the waste sites to avoid slumping in as we excavate. And we're going to be using a chemical called acrylamide, and that'll be taken out to eventually at the waste site, but that's to prevent the sloughing of the soils into the waste site as we excavate. And we're just drilling the boreholes. The injection has not yet started. That's the front of the building. Next slide, please. Room 18, this is the micropile grouting. This is what was completed in October. You can see that because of the dust and soil potential for coming up underneath, that's why they're in full anti-seize, 2 pair, as well as full respirator hoods, things of that nature, protect them from the dust that could come up. Next slide. This is the airlock, which is to the left of the photograph. And this is actually the truck port on the east side of the building. And this is where the waste is going to be coming out. One of the things that we're currently doing in adjacent to stabilizing the structure right now is that we're taking the debris out of the other hot cells. Because again, our plan right now is to take the soils, place them in bins, and then move them into the clean out hot cells, then grout them in place. And then, like we did with the 340 facility, if you remember the tank, we took that as a monolith and transported that up to the environmental restoration disposal facility. So that's the plan going forward right now, currently. What we did find, though, is when we're doing the horizontal boreholes late last fall, is that we found contamination underneath the building. Again, I emphasize underneath the building, but it was an unexpected place. It was in an area that back in 2010, when they're doing the geoprobes underneath the facility, we get refusal in that area, so we never really got a sample from that area. But what we did find is we found one hot spot of 984 R per hour, and then above it we found another hot spot of 776 R per hour. Boreholes 2 to 3 feet to the other side, the levels were much less. So what we're doing now is that we're continuing on preparing the hot cells, the clean outs, because that has to be done. But we are doing limited drilling or focused drilling in areas in and around in the rooms to determine the extent and condition of this additional contamination that we did not find. So we're in the process of doing that right now. We don't have final data. We still have some more drilling to do. One of the things that has been extremely difficult for us is that in the horizontal boreholes, we're getting a lot of refusal or deflection as you go. The long boreholes, as we call them, 103 to 105 feet. The short boreholes are 67. We're just getting a lot of problems. When they did build the base for the building, the 324 building built on, they had a lot of fill that they brought in, and we're finding, I think, about every boulder you can find underneath it as we're drilling through it. So credit to the crews, they are continuing on and moving forward. So again, we're drilling the base. This waste site is where we found the contamination is about 11 feet below the B cell itself and outside of the B cell waste site. And it's again underneath the area where the door is above, because again, the horizontal boreholes there to support the structure where the door is located above it. What that means for us is that we're going to reconsider what we get on from these sampling characterizations. the data that we're trying to gather right now. The contractor's doing that. They did successfully drill 2 more boreholes horizontal above where we found the hot spot. And then also they're drilling in room 131 and then room 118, or excuse me, 18, where they did the micropiles, and they're finding, we're taking measures there too. So we're trying to see how far out this additional contamination could be, as well as from the building. Again, I want to emphasize this is all under the building, so it is capped. We do have 2 down gradient wells that we're monitoring on a monthly basis. We've not seen any source of contamination, which is mainly cesium, strontium. Those are the 2 isotopes of concern. And we've not seen anything there. If we do detect something, obviously we'll increase our monitoring and take more aggressive action, maybe possibly pump and treat that again. That's going to be held off until we actually, start to see something.
May I ask a question before you proceed? Do you think that what you're finding, the additional waste, is from the same leak?
We don't know that yet. That's why we're going into room 18 and 131. Could you go back up a slide, please? See what else we have. Better slide. Actually, go forward, please, to the next slide, please, so it's easier to explain. This is room 131, and right now we're going to be putting in eventually the soil curtain that I mentioned. Is that you can see this machine is putting in the soil stabilization holes. Orientation, this is basically the soil curtain I mentioned. Here's the waste site that we know of, and then just outside of this and below it is where the additional contamination is found. So what we're hoping to do is that we actually took vertical samples in room 131 and 18, and we're gathering that data now. But initially what we're seeing is much, much less, in order of magnitude, less contamination the further we get out. So we just don't know. What we do know where the leak occurred, or the additional contamination occurred, is underneath a piping chase. And in that piping chase, years ago, they took photographs and they saw some crystalline material on the piping itself. So again, it's speculative on best, and we don't get paid to do speculation. But where we are right now, we're taking this very cautiously because we don't want to put the workers at risk. Again, to remind people, that waste site that we do know of, the 396 is 10 to 12,000 hours per hour. And we just want to make sure that we go in a methodical manner. So that's the reason for some of the delays we're having. One is drilling. Obviously, we were all impacted by COVID, not having to be able to work closely for several years. We do have one tri-party agreement milestone due in November of 24, and that's to complete the, yes, M1685A, and that's to complete the excavation of the waste site. It's on schedule right now, and we're hoping that the contamination, as we get a better idea just around it, we'll still make that. So our goal is to still make that milestone to excavate that waste site. So that's pretty much the news from where we are before. Next slide, please. Questions, please.
All right.
You want to go to agency?
Let's go to agencies first, and then I've got a queue cooking.
Go to EPA first.
Go to EPA first. Roberto, are you online with us? Oh, Anne.
Hi. Yeah, so Annie McCartney with EPA. I've come today since I oversee the 300 area scope for EPA. I haven't prepared any slides or anything, but I just wanted to share that we appreciate the progress that continues to be made towards the 300-296 removal. And we're having a number of transparent discussions with DOE. They've been very open about their progress on characterizing that additional hotspot and the progress they're doing with pushing through the boulders that they encounter. So that's been really nice to see that they are utilizing a variety of drilling modifications and keep working towards meeting the milestones that we agreed to. So I appreciate that, and that's all I have for today.
Thank you.
Ecology doesn't have anything to add. EP is the lead for 324. We support them.
All right.
Can I be in the blue, please?
Okay, so let me add, okay, so I've got Tom, Cecilia, Simone, Esteban, Chris, Tom Galeotto, and Jan.
Thanks for the briefing. Couple quick questions. I appreciate you mentioning the milestones. With the drilling problems, is there, this might be a little technical, is there sufficient clearance to use like a mini sonic rig instead of a geoprobe to get through the boulders?
What they've done is a question I can't answer. I'm not a drilling expert, but I do know that they modified the drilling tips, the bits, several times in order to get through this. And they're successful. It's not a constant battle. They can go in 20, 30 feet, hit it, slows down, and then they go again another 20, 30 feet, and then goes forward. They also have the capability, GPS capability, that they know when they're deflecting to off course, the main course. And one of the other things too, I didn't mention it, when you have the soil curtain too, where we're putting in the micropiles, we know where those are located so that we're not going to drill into those as well. So I forgot to mention that. So we are careful not to do that. Sonic drilling, I've not asked that of them. And I know we've not started that path yet. And we're using Apollo, a local company here. They're doing the drilling, and their expertise is our subcontractor for that work.
Second question was related to water supply and fire suppression lines around there. Have those been isolated and deactivated, or are they still charged?
The fire protection system has been isolated. When we had the freeze event 2 years ago, I think it was, we've taken action where we have a fire watch, roving fire watch, and we're in the process now of removing all combustibles from the facility. That should complete shortly. The people no longer inhabit the building on a daily basis. Their office spaces have been moved out as another precaution for the workers themselves. There still are people in the building, and again, we have fire watches when the active work is going on.
Thank you.
Right, I have Simone who's online, and then Esteban, you'll be after Simone. Simone, make sure you're unmuted so we can hear you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you for the presentation. I have a few questions. Some were just some clarifications that I missed in the audio. So the first one is, could you repeat what the two hotspot numbers were? I think I wrote 984 R per hour for one, but what was that second number?
770 R per hour.
170 R, thank you. And then could you repeat how deep the boreholes are that are being drilled?
Okay, the micropiles went down to a design depth of 31 feet. Those are the ones that were successfully completed in October. The vertical boreholes, or the soil stabilization boreholes in room 18 and 131, were going down, depending on, because room 131 is higher, that goes down to 25 feet from surface of the floor. And then room 18, they were going down, I believe, 15 feet. And then again, too, the purpose of those vertical stabilization holes are to provide a soil curtain around the wayside to prevent sloughing into it during excavation.
Great, thank you. And then my last question, could you talk a little bit more about how DOE is characterizing the hot spots, like the soil there? And is the plan to take the hotspot soil then into the building rooms for grouting? And are there plans to remove that grout later on, or is it a grout in place situation? Could you just talk a little bit more about that?
I'll be glad to. Good questions. Everybody's questions are good. That's why I'm here. With regards to the hotspots, we still don't have an idea of the extended condition, and that's why I'm a little cautious to state how we're going to do, because what we do end up finding may change our path forward on how we address this. Because if we have an extent of field of contamination underneath the building that we have to go back and replan the stabilization of the facility, because if it's going to be a wider excavation, deeper excavation, we have to reevaluate the civil engineering of the structure itself so we don't cause the building collapse or subsidence, like I mentioned, the doors becoming impinged, things of that nature. Right now, where we are with regards to the hotspots, there's just two. Again, we sampled to either side of the hotspots. The contamination readings were lower. And the way we're taking the readings down the borehole itself through the piping, we're taking rad readings, radiological readings itself. So we don't have any, and then we're taking off the sleeve, because the instrument's in the sleeve, we're taking swipes of the sleeves themselves to determine, the contamination. Again, radiation and contamination are two different things. Some people mix those up to do that. Where we are right now, again, where we found the hotspots, one was on top of the other, and the 777 was, or 770 was beneath the hotspot, which is hole 16, which was 984R. So we're sampling to either side and above, and then also in the room itself and outside, room 18131. That's doing the vertical pushes, as we call them, for the soil stabilization. We're getting rad readings from those as well. So again, it's a work in progress, and we'll be glad to come back and explain this to folks in more detail once we get the information, so we can share it, so everybody's aware of what we're at and what we're facing. Again, where we are right now, the plan is for the soil excavation to be put into bins, grouted, and the bins placed into the empty hot cells that we've cleaned out, A and C, and then possibly D if I remember right. And then it'd be a layer of grout, and then we bring in more bins and fill that. And what we did with the 340 facility, people recall, we had a tank that the levels were such that it was not conducive for worker safety to cut it up in place, do in situ demolition. So we grouted the entire facility. We'll create what we call a monolith, and then that monolith will be transported up to earth and disposed of as a unit. And again, it'll be individual hot cells. We'll wire saw cut each individual hot cell apart and then transport them up, and that's our goal. Should this contamination, it looks to be consistent, it is cesium and strontium contamination, is what we did find in the hotspot based on the probes, on the swipes. So if it's similar waste, we have to make sure we meet the waste acceptance criteria of the environmental restoration disposal facility, things like that. So there's a lot of things we have to assure ourselves to go forward. So if it is, we can move forward with the grouting, continue on with that. That's our plan, to go to earth. Long answer, but I just want to make sure I was clear. Did I answer your questions, please?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I have Esteban and then Chris. Esteban.
Yeah, so my first question is, I think it's been a hot topic, especially lately where you're in the process, it's worker safety. But current, plans for worker safety, have you encountered anything out of the regular, and how you kind of come and, how is that looking for like worker safety in general?
This is a very good question. What we did do is once we found the unexpected higher levels of contamination, we stopped work, we paused. Can't say stop work, that has a different meaning in our vernacular, but we paused work because we had to go back and reevaluate the radiological work permit itself to make sure that the people were in the proper personal protective equipment. And then also, if we had to make some changes in the way we were drilling. Right now, we're doing dry drilling as we go in. To do that, we're trying to minimize the use of water because we don't want to spread the contamination that way. We also minimize the amount of people down in the pit where they're doing the horizontal boreholes. So, worker safety is our primary concern, and that's not just lip service on our part. And I think folks that have been in facility watching work have observed that. So worker safety, when we hit a radiological condition that we're not expecting, we do what's called an in-process LR review, and that's basically where the workers, the radiological engineers, and the radiological control technicians get together and do an effect finding. What happened, what was expected, that type of thing. So again, then we pause. If we have to, we reevaluate the work package, and then rebrief it to the workers that plan on the day, and then go back to work.
Can you refresh ALARA, the acronym?
As low as reasonably achievable. And basically we use time distance shielding to protect the work.
Okay, and the second question I have, because I think, since you're in that process of all this work happening and things are going to happen, I think when it comes with budget, the impacts on it, and also on the planning stage, because, you know, stuff has, especially doing this type of work, how is it impacting your budget and the whole planning, and your whole planning for the work in progress?
Right now, what we did do is when the contractor budgeted this work, we do try to build in some contingencies, funds and things of that nature schedule. But again, let me reemphasize first though that safety is paramount and that we'll proceed at a safe pace and we're moving forward. If it takes longer than in the outcoming years, we would go forward with additional funds requests through Congress through that chain, which we're going through right now for the 24, 25 cycles or 25 cycle formulation. It will have an impact. I can speak because I had the PFP project before this. And we did impact other projects such as groundwater and then waste management services. And where this project is located in PBS 41, Project Baseline Summary 41, it's in what we call a financial control point that Congress gives us. And it's with the Central Plateau work, PBS 40, Project Baseline 40. So what we would do is we'd reevaluate our work and then see where we have some efficiencies that's within that control point, and then reapply that funds, to the work. One of the things we also do is that if we are hitting a pause, we would go forward with reassigning workers to other project work so they stay employed, but also that helps, bring the payroll down for that one specific project. So there's a number of options that we do follow to maintain that. So if we do run into a funding issue, we do try to solve it internally. And so far, that's not happened in this project. Thank you.
All right, I've got Chris and then Tom Galliotto. Chris.
I have two technical questions. Have you found any chemical contamination anywhere, or is it all radioisotopes?
My understanding right now is mostly radiological isotopes.
Mostly?
Yes. Okay. I don't have a chemical breakdown of that. If there are other chemical contaminants, I'm not aware of that, but I'll find out.
And what's the composition of the grout that you're using? Is it all Portland cement or mixture of Portland cement, sand, Portland cement, fly ash? Do you know?
I do not know that.
Okay.
I'll try to find out for you.
Thank you.
All right, I've got Tom, Jan, Tom, and Mia, and Rob. This Tom.
Okay.
You guys must have had a lot of coffee.
Tom, I think you indicated that DOE feels that they can meet the November 2024 for excavation completion. Was that right?
Correct. We're still on schedule for that.
Right.
We're just not sure with this additional contamination what it may mean with stabilization of the structure itself.
Right. That is good news, of course, for us. The question I have is, you mentioned a number of activities going on with boreholes and sampling. And is it correct to assume that DOE is planning on a full detailed mapping of the contamination levels under 324 before you start the excavation process so you know where you're having to go?
That's correct. That's why we're doing characterization, above and below. We're not below, but above, and then to the sides. And we're trying to see, again, trying to get a handle on the extended condition. And again, speculation on my part is that if we have to widen, the excavation that we currently planned, obviously we have to relook at the structural integrity of the facility itself. We may have to do additional stabilization or, replan the work in another way.
And when you finally get to that point where you know the mapping of the contamination levels, when do you think that would be? When do you think you'll know what that is?
We were hoping to get that information by the end of February, but with the drilling issues we've had and then the weather, the people in the pit, when it got really cold, it was hard to work. Probably, ideally, would be end of April at the latest.
Okay.
Somewhere between then and now.
Okay. Good, thank you.
All right, I've got Jan and then Tom Cecilia. Jan.
So we had the opportunity to go to the mock-up facility here
Yes.
a while back. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the interplay between the mock-up facility and the worker training, because I see that, you whether the work suspension, I won't call it a work stoppage either, like whether that played into your planning as you were figuring out what to do next.
Okay, thank you for that. Where we are right now, the mock-up is across the street from the Canaan L 300 area, for those that may not know where it is. And it is a full-scale mock-up. The reason why we went full-scale is so that as you, technically, if you start out lab scale, move up, you may, by doing full-scale, you minimize that effort. The beauty of the mock-up, it allows training of new workers. We've had significant turnover of staff, both on the contractor side. For the last 2 years, they've been losing 25% of their skilled workforce on an annual basis for the last 2 years. So with the newer people coming in, Timmy Travis came back. He was office manager at PFP. He retired, now he's back. They were able to bring him back, those who remember him. He sat in the room with all the new workers, and they went around the room. One was a Domino's pizza delivery person. One worked at, ranch and home, that type of stuff. And so people coming into the work environment we have highly complex and dangerous is that beauty of the mock-up. It allows workers to be trained in a clean environment. They do hands-on tools. We use the exact same tools in the mock-up that they'll use in the field. We also proof procedures there. There's been a number of innovations from the workers that came up with regards to how to do the work better during the excavation for not only safety, but also efficiency of the work in itself. And then with regards to the 324 mock-up, if I may diverge, we've been using the mock-ups at the maintenance and storage facility. I would recommend people arrange a tour there in the future. That's where we're doing the capsule mock-up right now. We have a full-scale mock-up of G-cell in a cell. Again, they're the purpose of the exact same equipment. They're test articles, but it'll be the exact same equipment they'll use in transferring the capsules, things of that nature. So training, procedure development, tool development, and then also if there is a problem that we do encounter that was unexpected, we have a clean environment to go back to try to replicate that problem. You saw the movie Apollo 13, they had that one in the command module, the mock-up, that's what he was using to find out how to do it. Is that type of concept. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you. All right, I've got
Thank you, Jay.
4 people with questions. Tom, Cecilia, then Mia, Rob, and Simone is online with us as well.
So I remember yesterday I saw on social media a new blast about 324 from the Hanford site on Twitter, I think. And it has some pictures of a large waste container being taken out of the airlock. And I don't know if that's the debris that you were talking about coming out of the hot cells? Or,
it is.
Okay. Might be a good picture to get into the minutes or something, if we can do that. But
if you have the presentation, we can show that airlock photo if you bring that back.
The airlock photo? Ryan is our wizard today.
There you go. That's it.
That one?
Yeah. You can see this is the truck port. The trucks come in, and we use the environmental restoration disposal facility, canisters and other things of that nature. What we do is that they'll load it in the hot cell. You can see the individuals in the full respirator hoods, full hoods and NRCs on the other side of the line, so to speak, and RCTs on this side, near side. Is the waste is brought out and then it's reanalyzed to make sure that we understand what's in the waste itself in a lower radiological environment, so that we can make sure that it's acceptable to the environmental restoration disposal facility. And then again, too, when it's pulled out, the main thing too is that when they roll canisters out, make sure that the waste is low rad reading so that people can work around it. And then it's once we get it outside in the clean storage area, that we have is jersey barriers for shielding, but we also do that's where we do the final waste acceptance criteria. It's a low rad environment to make sure that we can put it in there.
Okay. Mia, then Rob.
Yeah, if you find that just the contaminated soil doesn't meet the waste acceptance criteria for ERDF, where will it go?
That's a question that we have to answer ourselves. We haven't come up with a final answer for that. Again, if we do, again, that's the reason why we have to make sure we work through this methodical way. We do know cesium, strontium can be disposed of there, and again, that's a major concern. So we have the isotopes of concerns. But with the waste site itself, I mean, this soil seems to be somewhat consistent as, as far as the same isotopes. We would put it into the hot cells and, ground it in place, and then it would stay there. But if there is a problem with the waste, then we'd have to replan that.
And do you have options you're thinking of, or you're just not even there yet?
There are options being discussed, but until we get better information, again, I'm trying not to be speculative, but also trying to be transparent at the same time. Sometimes it's a little difficult. The purpose why I brought this up too, if I may diverge a little bit, is to let you know that we do have an unexpected condition. It is in a safe configuration beneath the building. We're trying to analyze a path forward. The contractor is. Good questions, and I'll have to make sure that that's one of the ones we answer.
I'm trying to get that picture downloaded for Josh. Rob, and then Simone, you're on deck. Rob?
So, having worked out there, I'm kind of familiar that there's a lot of infrastructure in the ground around
Yes.
there, pipe chases and et cetera, drain fields and further out. So could you describe the wire cutting event and how you get a vertical horizontal cuts, wire cutting, and not disturb all of the stuff that's underneath there, or is that just too early?
It's too early right now. I know when we took the 340 facility out,
Right.
is that a lot of the utilities and stuff were taken out ahead of time and then capped off or necessarily rerouted in order to take that out. I imagine we're going to follow the same process to make sure we don't get into that. But,
So that's,
yeah, we have to make sure we understand what we're getting.
then you're gonna cut holes in the top of the roof with cranes and somehow lift some of these large.
No, they won't be lifted. What we'll do is that we did the monolith, we did demolition around the hot cells themselves, and then we excavated underneath, and then we propped it up. If you've ever seen the submarine forge, you can see the cribbing as well. That lowered it on to the actual transporter, and then we transported it out. So we don't find it's too heavy to lift. We can move that.
Yeah.
Simone is with us online, and she has another question. Simone?
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. So back to the hotspot really quick. So the hotspot was caused by a leak from the 324 building. Do you know what that leak was characterized as? Like the material of the leak? Did that have a characterization?
Well, I see this as a two-part question, if I may. The initial waste site that we saw underneath the V cell was due to a hole in the pan when they had a spill, and that was cesium strontium. We were actually, if I recall correctly, we were looking at doing some experimental work to classify some waste. We call them German laws. That was that. This waste right now that we found in the unexpected spot underneath the building is of the same isotopic characteristics of cesium and strontium. We don't know the source of that leak right now. It could have come from that same pan leak that Pam had asked earlier. But again, too, that's why we're doing the extent of contamination surveys or probes underneath the soil, in the soil, to see how far it spreads out and see what the potential source is. So far, we have determined that it is still all underneath the building, so it is protected by the building as an effective cap in itself. And that we're, again, by probing around the hot spot, we're trying to figure out, where it could have come from. Did I answer your question this time, please?
Yes, thank you. And then one other quick question. Is there any public process planned as part of any of these characterizations, or if there'll be any public reports of the characterizations or building mapping coming out?
Again, if requested, I'll be glad to come back and talk again to you about the 324 building and the project in itself. But what I would ask is for some time to allow us to finish the characterization and then going forward.
I meant more general public, like not HAB, but will there be like any public notice of the characterization once complete? Or would that just have to be as a request from the HAB?
I'm not familiar with that process, so I'm reluctant to answer that, not to be evasive. It's just that there's a process that we follow. And again, if the information is made available to the regulators, I'm sure they'd be more than willing to. I have to coordinate with them as well too. So let me take that as a lookup, please. And I'm not saying no, I need to find out the process and then provide that information as needed.
Great, thank you.
So I've got 3 folks in queue. I've got Pam, Tom, and Chris. Pam.
They have had a chance to go on a tour when that vault that you were talking about was ready for transfer to
Yes.
to URDA. And it was really interesting. And I don't remember that one or something else in the 300 area. You had a special apparatus. And I'm remembering the name Barnhart or something like that. And I'm seeing some of that equipment on the west side of the highway. Is that stage for you to use again for heavy lifts?
Well, I'm sure Barnhart would love to have the work. So,
Well, it's been there for a long time, so it must have been real busy.
right now, I can't answer that question. Right now, from the projects we have right now, that equipment has not been used recently since that.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if they have that as their laydown yard for other work in the area, but right now I'm not aware of it on site elsewhere.
Okay, I just wondered why it was still there. Thank you.
Back to the Tom table.
Yeah, and this one's a periodic question that comes up, and I just want to make sure when the waste is characterized and classified to go to URDIF and meet the WAC waste acceptance criteria, I just want to make sure that there is that DOE's planning to do an evaluation to make sure that the waste is not high-level tank waste, because that's what was used to make the German locks.
Let me answer that in 2 parts, please. We did receive a letter via EPA. A letter by the Yakima Nation was written to EPA. We did get a copy, and they asked a question as to why do we consider the soils underneath 324 building to be not high-level waste. We're undergoing an evaluation right now through that. I really can't comment on that right now, but I do know a draft report has been generated in response to that and is going through the proper review and comment phases right now, not only locally, but also at headquarters too, because we want to make sure we get it right.
It's great to hear that that is part of the characterization process, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Chris.
I think you said the 2 new hotspots that you discovered, one was on top of the other or above the other?
Yes.
Is there clean soil between them, or is there low-level contaminant radioactivity between them, do you know? Indicating that there's been some leakage from the top down to the bottom.
Right now, we did not sample in between the 2 holes because the spatial difference is about maybe 2.5 feet.
Okay.
And so what we do know, the lower hole had a lower rad level than the upper hole. But again, too, right now you're talking about 10-inch lines, borings going in. We didn't do that.
So there could be that from the upper contamination, it could be continuous down to the lower. You just don't know.
That's what we're trying. Excuse me. That's what we're investigating. Yes.
Rose from Yakima has a question, I think referring back to the letter and the work you're doing. Rose, would you like to repeat your question? Not everybody's logged on and can see chat.
Okay, well, you could have read it. I just wanted to know if he has any information as to when we can expect that report. This has kind of been going on for some time now, and we're really have been waiting to hear back and to get this report you're speaking of.
If I could have my bosses back in headquarters do as I request, we'd already have an answer. Now, that's a smart aleck response. Answer to your question is that it is going through review. I can't answer how long it's going to take. But we do know that once we do get the report back, we'll have to interface with EPA, since the letter went to them first, to make sure we're in agreement and then move forward. So it's in process. That's the word I wanted to give. We are aware of it. For some reason, the letter was written to EPA, not to DOE, which is fine. We accept that. But there was some delay caused because of that as well. And once we get a better date, we'll be glad to share that.
Thank you.
We're just up against the time. We got 3 minutes. If anyone wants to jump in the queue at the last minute, this is your chance. And if no one else does, we really appreciate you making the time to present this to us and come out and have this frank discussion.
You're welcome.
It really means a lot to the board.
And if you have questions, Gary's here to gather them for you. And if you need follow-on, we'll be glad to answer your questions as we can. I do plan to probably come back as needed to give you a follow-up where we're at, hopefully as soon as we can. Again, I don't mean to say we're pushing things off or delaying things. We're just trying to make sure with what we're facing. And then if we have to change our plans, that's probably all I'll be able to tell you, because we're gonna have to relook at things. But again, I just want to reemphasize, it's in a safe configuration. Work is still ongoing. That will not impact the structural stability of the work. The hot cell cleanout is going on, and the training of the new workers, things of that nature, is also progressing well as well.
And as a follow-up, we are meeting around quarterly, this committee. Unless something significant happens, what would be your ideal lookout? Is it a year? Is it 3 quarters, if you had to estimate for coming back?
I would say next quarter. We should have some better answers by then. If not, then I can tell you where we're at and what we're facing. And then by then, I am hopeful that we'll be able to get the letter back to the Yakima Nation in response to their good question that they provided to us.
Thank you.
So interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
It's always hard dealing with unknowns. Always.
That's one part of our business. Some of these facilities and stuff it's kind of a gift that keeps on giving. Thank you again.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Gary. So now you guys get on to the hard topics.
On the agenda, we have a break here. Well, we took a break before the presentation. What are our options?
So facilitator math says take a break every 60 to 90 minutes out of compassion for the people who are with us online. We don't have item number 5 on the agenda because we figured out the election. So lunch is at 11:30. It would be up to the availability of staff if you want to move up discussion with regulators. So I would put it to the group. Do they need a break, or do they want to keep going?
So 2 questions. 1, group, do we need a break? And 2, ecology at EPA, if we don't take a break, are you willing and able to talk early?
You want to talk early?
Yeah.
EPA, are you able to talk early this topic, or do you need to wait till 10:30?
Roberto and Anne? Annie?
Yeah, I can hang around.
Super.
Yep, same.
Let's compromise and take 5 minutes.
There's no such thing as a 5-minute agenda.
There's no such thing as a compromise.
So people online, 10:20.
Yeah, do they really need that big door? Right.
are at 10:20, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. So, as folks filter back in, this next agenda item is an informal discussion with the regulators. A couple lifetimes ago, it seems, before COVID, there was a public meeting where we were talking about non-time critical removal actions, and the question came up is, these are decisions that are made, and then the next time we hear about it is sort of an after-action report on the administrative record, or we get a briefing that the work's done and it went well. And I think it was Craig at EPA that said that the HAB and particularly the RAP would be a good place to sort of have a check-in every once in a while to see how the work's going, and nothing formal, nothing officially reportable, just a conversation. So wanted to hold this space to have that conversation, check in with ecology and EPA, see if there's anything that is on their radars that, maybe this board could be looking at in the next 3 to 5 years, and understanding that DOE isn't here to be part of the conversation. DOE doesn't have an SME present to be part of the conversation, and so we want to be respectful of that. But Gary is able to take something back for follow-up, but they're not here to, I don't want to say defend themselves because that's the wrong context, but they're not here to respond. They don't have an SME here to respond. So I guess let's go in alphabetical order for the regulators. Do we go US or Washington?
Fed or state?
Or ecology or EPA? Do you guys want to, I guess, ecology, you're in the room, it's your house.
Okay.
Why don't you guys go first, and just, if you have anything that you want to talk about, and then after that, we'll go through questions that might come out.
Yeah, so we have a few topics we wanted to share on. One of them was the waste isolation pilot plant comment period letter that we submitted recently, and then we'll go over a comment period that's starting on Monday, and I'll let Eddie talk about WIP, and I have some copies I can hand out.
Yeah, so I believe it did come up during a HAB meeting most recently as well. There was a question about the waste isolation pilot plan. And some of the conditions in there around closure of that facility early, per se, as the complex newsletter had noted, or whatever it may be, right? So ecology had looked into that condition, or those conditions in the permit renewal, and decided that we wanted to provide a public comment related to those conditions, and particularly just highlighting the impact to the Hanford site when it comes to the management of true mixed waste. So we had issued letter 23 NWP 026, which many of you have in front of you right now, identifying ecology's position about early closure of the waste isolation pilot plant. We didn't necessarily comment on the actual conditions that were proposed in the draft permit renewal, but we just wanted to note that ecology, based off of the M91 milestone series that we had just recently negotiated with U.S. Department of Energy in that milestone series, we wanted to identify 2 things. One, the inventory of waste on the Hanford site for true mixed waste, as it was outlined in the M91 milestone series and the project management plan that we review annually with U.S. Department of Energy, as well as the timeline, and just looking at the milestones that we had out there, which go out until 2050 for the M91 milestone series. So those are really the 2 things we highlighted in the letter. Again, our position was that closure of WIP at the end of this 10-year permit renewal, once the next permit expires, is not in line with the 91 milestone series and how we push that out until 2047, 2050 timeframe. And we just wanted to make sure that was highlighted for New Mexico leading into that conversation and for their consideration as they renew their permit down there at that point, so. And I'm happy to answer any questions regarding the letter or Ecology's position.
Any response?
Not yet. So we did get a response noting that they received their public comment at this point, and we're looking out for any response from New Mexico on that letter that we sent them at this point.
Sorry, Eddie, I was hanging up the things on the shirt you said. So we submitted that comment about February 17th, right? And the comment period ended about the same time. So the comment period ended just a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, February 18th.
And a tangential comment, we do have a issue manager's team that's working on a related advice that on transuranic waste management, and we'll be hoping to have a draft of that to the RAP in June.
Okay.
I just spoke this morning with my local government counterpart from Carlsbad. Before retiring 3 years ago, was director of the Hanford communities locally, so I've worked with local government people down there for a really long time. And so I asked some questions that has been discussed in the committee. And there's one rumor going around that they don't have enough land and that they would need to go back to the Land Withdrawal Act. And I was advised that they have plenty of land, and let me find my specific notes here that are a little scratched, to take all of not only the EM waste that is anticipated, but the true waste that will be generated by Savannah River and Los Alamos in new pit assembly. So there, no problem with capacity. The air permit has been incorporated into their larger permit. But the new ventilation system, the new and utility shaft and tunnel should be completed and connected in August. So that's in good position. They're now in a clean area of the mine, so the previous poof and contamination is all closed off. So they're in panel 8, which is the last panel before they need a bigger mine. And they are in negotiations. And what he said that was alarming is that the people at WIP are skeptical that Hanford is going to be ready to send them waste when they're ready to receive it. And I know, so this is a question obviously for DOE, with COVID and prioritization, since we weren't able to ship, they've probably moved staff around and they're going to have to redeploy to get ready to ship. But I think that's a good point for HAB advice, is get ready so that when they're ready to receive, we're ready to ship. Let's see, what else do you say?
And I think in the priorities meeting on Monday night, that was something that was reported that for fiscal 25, part of the budget is ramping up the preparedness to ship.
And certification starting too.
Yeah, well, the certification is done by Carlsbad, so they'd have to send someone up to Richland to do that.
So they are currently receiving about 14 shipments a week. They'd like to be receiving 17. That's obviously mostly coming from Idaho, and Idaho is sending 2 trucks at a time, and their stuff's all ready to go. So it's just the capacity of the vehicles to move it. And the state wants Los Alamos prioritized, but they haven't been doing much digging. They're not ready to ship, so they can't ship if they don't have it ready. So anyway, so we are high on their priority, and I think that's a good thing.
Got Dan Solitz with a question. He's online with us. Dan?
Thank you. Good morning. my information from WIP itself, and this is a response to a tweet, is that they're at 40%. They've used up 40% of their capacity, and it's not a matter of land so much as it is cubic meters. They're allowed, I think, 174,000 cubic meters, and they're at 40% of that. The deposit itself is probably as wide as the Chesapeake River, and I'm not quite sure how deep it is, and they can probably go down another layer, but they need congressional authorization to exceed not the land, but the cubic meter capacity of the site itself. And I think we kind of need to keep an eye on that. Thank you.
I'll ask that question.
Well, Dan, it's nice to know WIP is responsive on Twitter.
You know, not many people are, but they did. It's in terms of government agencies.
Yeah, DOE's EM's social media team is responsive, which is good. Yeah.
So I will note that was something Ecology is aware of on two cases. One regarding the recertification. Our project within my section is responsible for the recertification process at the RAP facility. So we have been in conversations with US DOE regarding the recertification, making sure that is ready to go when we anticipate shipments to start going to WIP in approximately 2028, I believe. As far as the cubic meter question, at least the known inventory of true mixed waste that Ecology is aware of at this point, we don't have any concerns regarding the capacity issue. We believe that there is capacity there at the waste isolation pilot plant for the true mixed waste that we're aware of today at the Hanford site. So there are two documents that we look at annually to identify the inventory of true mixed waste that we're aware of. One is the land disposal restriction report, which we review and approve annually as part of the tri-party document. And then the other document that we review as well within my section is the N91 project management plan, which is the document we chose to attach to this letter because it offered information about the timeline as well as most of the inventory of true mixed waste in the Hanford site. So we decided to submit that as part of the letter that we sent to the public comment period that was going on at the time. So.
Esteban, and then Rob.
Yeah, so I think just kind of keeping conscience and self-aware of the current situation here at Hanford. I think I remember, I think it was because of, I don't know, I was working the midterm elections and a friend of mine who was a lobbyist in DC basically said, hey, we're not going to get anything done with Congress that's coming up here. I said, well, I don't know, what are you telling me for? I'm not that lobbyist, you know? But the biggest thing is, and I think, you know, here in Pam and everybody, I think like Rob said, dealing with the unknowns, and I think we're in that process of things happening, is Ecology really, you know, if stuff happens and you're like with this happening and everything, are you ready to kind of definitely when it comes to dealing with the federal agencies to submit the responses and anything that might happen with the unknowns?
Yeah, as far as the unknowns, so one thing I'd like to note regarding the concerns around the WIP permit renewal is it is a draft permit at this point, right? It is an unknown as far as whether those conditions are actually going to make it into the issuance of that permit or not. And we don't know what's going to happen in 10 years when U.S. Department of Energy and its contractors and New Mexico go back into conversations about the next renewal and whether they're going to renew it for another 10 years or whatever it may be. But to go back to your question about the unknowns about the true mixed waste in the Hanford site, I'd say our main priority outside of making sure that there's a disposal facility out there is making sure that we retrieve the rest of the retrievably stored waste that remains in site. I think that would be our main priority moving forward, focused on the Hanford site, right? We want to get those containers out of the ground into safe storage and eventually certified and sent off to a disposal facility, treated and sent off to a disposal facility at that point. So There's two focuses that we're concerned about right now. One, making sure recertification gets back up and running here at the Hanford site, so we can start sending stuff to WIP, some of the waste to WIP. But also, you know, the last of the retrievals that have to happen as well. We had actually identified that in the letter, what's left of that retrievably stored waste that needs to be taken out of the ground and put into safe storage, likely within the central waste complex. We looked at the capacity of the central waste complex to receive the rest of those cubic meters of waste, and we believe that there's enough space within the central waste complex to receive the last of that retrievably stored waste.
So, online, Rose had asked when shipments from Hanford to WIP would start, and Tom says under M91 shipments would start in 2028. Is that
correct? That is the timeframe we're looking at.
Cool. Pam?
You just answered my question about central waste complex capacity. Do we have any certified containers ready to go? Or do they have to be recertified because we've been sitting around for so long?
I believe there was an inventory of containers that were certified when the events at the waste isolation pilot plant had happened. Whether those have to be recertified or not, I'm not exactly sure. That's going to be up to the team here at Hanford and at WIP coming up to identify if recertification is necessary based off of any new criteria they might have for acceptance criteria at the waste isolation pilot plant. So
I have one other question. So, most of the waste is pretty much in barrels, items and miscellaneous stuff. When we got the stimulus money a number of years ago, they dug up a bunch of that stuff. Is there a large volume of that material that is going to have to be packaged differently?
Packaged differently. It will have to go into the containers.
WIP containers.
Yeah, the WIP containers themselves. And I believe the project management plan, if I can refer to it right here, I believe we have approximately 5,000 cubic meters of true mixed waste that has to go into certifiable containers. So that's waste that's stored within the central waste complex right now that has to get repackaged at this point. And that includes drums and other large containers.
Thank you.
So, obviously, if you can stick around for more discussion, that would be great. I do want to make sure we give EPA a chance to join the conversation. Transuranic waste is definitely important. It's on everyone's mind, and appreciate Ecology's engagement on the national level to make sure that the mission gets completed. Annie, Roberto, do you have any hot items that you'd like to talk about, or?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, all right, sweet. Yeah, hi, everyone. Roberto from EPA here. Yeah, just to give some very general highlights of what EPA has been involved with recently. Starting with 100 BC, we currently have an extension on EPA's review of the RDRA work plan in place as we're working through some of the cultural issues between the Department of Energy and Yakima Nation. That extension is on place to end March 31st, but we will most likely submit another extension notice as we're continuing to make some steps forward in that process. Additionally, for 100K, we're also in the development of the Remedial Investigation Feasibility Study, RIFS documents. And again, we're still working with DOE on that and trying to close out some of our comments and concerns with the document. And additionally, further down the line, we are expecting a proposed plan to come out for 100K. I am drawing a blank right now on the date right now. Sorry for that proposed plan document, but once I have that date in my head, I will give you all a heads up. Yeah, let's see what else. Yeah, we're still, as we have mentioned earlier, we're working with DOE on the 324 building and the work that's been ongoing with that. And if you have anything more that you'd like to add on to that, feel free. And additionally, we are also expecting to meet the milestones for the Central Plateau that we had agreed to with the Department of Energy. And that's generally the big picture items that we have right now.
Thank you. One question that we try to keep track on because it's important and it's RAP's sort of one of RAP's tasks is to check in on the ERDF soil and debris balance. I know the agencies were trying really hard to make sure that there wasn't a lot of clean fill going in to go around demolition debris and ERDF. Just wanted to see, is that still happening? Is the collaboration still happening? Is it still going well? Is it improving?
Yeah, I can jump in on that one. So it has been going fairly well. The plug-in approach letter that went over regarding some waste sites added into CW3 supports that. That is able to add some contaminated soil into ERDF to balance out some of the other debris. And of course, right now with 100K work going on, there's a lot of soil, I think, coming from there. So for the time being, yes, but we are definitely looking on the longer term at how DOE is balancing their planning for that. And we've got some other work like with 200 IA1 where we'd like to see that starting up, as soon as we could, so that we get those soil waste sites cleaned up to continue to balance that. So yeah, we do continue to keep an eye on it. Right now, I think it's going pretty well.
Thank you. Any other questions or discussion items for the regulators from the committee? Chris? Rob? Next.
If I remember correctly, the caissons in 61811 are supposed to contain a fairly significant inventory of remote handled true. And the vertical pipe units in 61811 maybe contain an unknown amount of true. The records, as I recall, weren't very good about exactly what went in there. Is this scheduled to go, if in fact the caissons do contain a fair bit of remote handled true, are those scheduled to go ultimately to the WIP, or is there a disposal pathway for those?
Yeah, so I think the project management plan discusses this a little bit about some of the unknowns as far as the inventory goes, right? We do have most of the inventory, as far as we know today, listed into the land disposal restriction report for the project management plan itself. But section 7 of the project management plan talks about cleanup actions under CERCLA and what we do know about inventories under that waste, as well as unknowns that will have to be characterized like you talked about, right? If they're not sure if it's true or true mixed waste within some of the ancillary equipment and things like that. So as far as scheduling, I'd imagine when some of the cleanup actions have been approved, there will be some characterization that will have to happen, and further inventories of true mixed waste will be identified at some point in time.
So in other words, it's really unknown right now.
Yes, correct.
I've got Rob and Rose in queue.
I'm listening to all this about the unknowns and compiled with a permitting process, which really I'm kind of unsure of. So could you describe I mean, I would like to see box number 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, all labeled and ready to go. But what does it take to permit? You know, say you do have a box, what are the steps that go into permitting that for acceptance at? Or is that too big a subject to even think about?
Yeah, and maybe I'll ask for a clarification. You're saying permitting waste to go to WIP. Are you talking about the characterization of it?
Well, you're talking about a permitting process, right? And characterization is just like one thing of that. Is that gonna be just a PAM that goes over it and checks it out? Or you're talking about isotopic? Or you're talking about, you know, characterization is a big area. And so I don't quite understand why we're looking at years to develop a permit. So there must be other steps in permitting that I don't know about. So maybe, I don't know, maybe you could explain what the typical permitting cycle would be and the steps you go through?
Yeah.
Or is that too much?
I can give a brief overview of the permitting process,
Right.
and I think there's two subjects here we're talking about, and I'll try to break them apart here a little bit. So the permitting process we're talking about here, especially as it relates to the public comment period, is the waste isolation pilot plant is going through a renewal of their current permit, right? So at this point in time, at the end of 10 years, a dangerous waste or hazardous waste permit, in this case, expires, and it has to be renewed by the permittee and the lead off authority, in this case, New Mexico Environmental Department, right? So they had gone through the process of renewing their permit for the waste isolation pilot plant, and the timeline is
It's been 4 years already.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I understand it. That's a while.
All right, and I wasn't aware of that myself, but, and you can imagine the renewal that we're going through at the Hanford site is much longer than 4 years at this point, but, yeah, so the renewal process is kind of built into that. The permit expires at the end of 10 years, they go through the renewal process, goes out for public comment, any final changes that have to be made to that permit are done, and then it gets issued for another 10 years. So I think that's one part of the conversation that you're talking about. And then the other part, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're talking about some of the unknowns about inventories here at the Hanford site and the process that goes into characterizing them and ensuring that they're inventoried appropriately for disposal at.
We can say that for later, but understanding what you just said is that the permits expire, and then every time they have to renew theirs,
correct,
we're gonna have to renew ours. And so it doesn't do us any good to start renewing now, because you don't know what they're gonna have.
Yeah, I don't think our permit renewals are tied to each other per se. When ours expires, whenever that date is, we go through the permit renewal process, and WIP in New Mexico has their own date of expiration, right? And it's really based off the date of issuance, not necessarily tied to each other. Yeah.
So how long is a permit good for then?
10 years.
Thanks.
Rose, we've got Rose online from Yakima Nation.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. I'm going to take us back over into a different direction, if that's okay. And I want to address something that Roberto had said with regards to the BC area and the extension. I did want folks to know that we are currently working with Department of Energy to resolve the issues that we've had that is kind of holding this up. So it is something that we do plan on getting resolved. It's not unresolvable at all, but because of the timing and because of specific times that are associated with cultural resource regulations and whatnot, there may need to be an additional extension issued in the BC for that reason, for the work plan. And then also, just kind of as a heads up, we are looking at potentially having maybe some delays, possibly associated with the K and the N areas as well. So I really felt like I wanted to give that heads up. It's not like we're trying to hold anything up or anything like that, but there are specific timelines that are associated with cultural resource regulations and how things need to be done. And so right now, that's partly what we're kind of looking at, is with regards to with that hold up. So anyway, like I say, I kind of wanted to give just a brief explanation of that, so folks kind of had an understanding that, we are working through it. It's not unsurmountable, and we will get through it.
Ryan.
I know, Tom, we've got, 10 minutes till the end of this topic. We have Ecology has a comment period starting Monday, and we thought we could just provide a very quick high-level look at what it is. And then, of course, it starts Monday, so if anybody has any questions, you're more than free to reach out to me, and I can answer any questions you guys have. But we thought we'd just share that just to give you a bit of a heads up, since it's kind of timely. So, Eddie, you want to provide a quick little rundown, maybe?
Yeah. Sure, not a problem. I believe it was December of not this last year, but the year before, where Ecology had issued a letter to permit 7 closure unit groups at the solid waste operating complex. That modification and those closure plans were appealed by Department of Energy, I believe on January 5th at that time. We had gone into settlement talks as part of the Pollution Control Hearing Board process to try to resolve the issue regarding Department of Energy's appeal and the permits that we were trying to get issued at the time. We did reach settlement in October of 2022. And as part of that settlement, Ecology was going to modify 5 of the closure plans based off of that settlement agreement, and a condition that affected all 7 of the closure unit groups at that time. We have drafted the modifications to those closure plans and drafted the new language for the particular condition surrounding notifications of deviations from the closure plans themselves. And the public comment period is going to start here on, I believe, March 13th. It's open for comment as it relates to the changes that we made to those 5 closure plans and the condition that we changed for all 7 of the closure plans, or closure unit groups, sorry.
How long does that run?
I believe 45 days.
Yeah, it's 45 days.
Can you describe at a high level what those changes were?
At a high level, there were some changes to some of the sampling locations that were identified for those 5 closure plans. There were some changes to decontamination of the concrete pads at these 5 closure unit groups itself. And the other part that was changed, as I had mentioned before, was the notification that Department of Energy provides Ecology when there's a deviation from the closure plan itself. We had altered that from, I believe it was a 24-hour period for Department of Energy to notify us, to a 4 business day time frame, just based off of some of the conversations we had with Department of Energy around that. So those are really the major changes that you'll see in the materials that are going to be put out as part of that public comment period.
And to clarify again, the comment period is going to run March 13th to April 28th.
Very good. So I get this, so going from 24 hours to 4-day notice?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And are we still on track to deal with the site-wide permit next January?
That's the latest I've heard, and that's what my public involvement team's planning for, is the PI for a public involvement for January 24 is the plan still. That's the last I heard. So we're planning for that.
Yeah. we'll probably need to start a task force or something for the board for that, because it's a multi-thousand page document.
Yeah, it'll be about 20,000 plus pages this go around, and I'm planning to come to the Public Involvement Committee at their May meeting and start talking about just the public involvement specific parts of it, just to get some informal kind of conversation with the PIC and get some feedback on what we're planning for public involvement for the comment period.
Great.
It's scary, that big.
Okay, so we're trying to get a fact sheet that DOE put out called about on the plug-in approach that Annie mentioned to get more dirty dirt into ERDF. We're going to get that added to the chat if we can, a link to it so everyone can get to it.
They also mentioned a project management plan, so.
Yes, the PMP. I will
link to that as well.
I have a link to that. I can get it.
You have a link to that? I'm just having trouble finding the fact sheet.
It's in the Transuranic issue manager team emails. So any other questions for ecology or EPA before we break for lunch? Oh, lunch is 11:30.
Yeah, Chris is on deck.
I'm hungry. So I guess before we break for Chris. Sorry, guys.
Josh, can you put up the table I sent you this morning?
Ryan is our tech guru today, and he has it.
Let me pull it up for you.
While we're transitioning, I just want to say I appreciate the regulators being available to have this conversation. I appreciate DOE supporting this agenda item, even without an SME present. It's important to have open discussion in a forum like this. So thank you.
I sent Josh an updated table.
This should be it. Yeah, this should be the way to make it.
So next agenda item, we have the Chris Sutton, who has been recently crowned as the cleanup priorities czar.
Now you're.
No, I made him a czar
You went
yesterday.
from a
Yeah, I
general
made him
to a
a
czar.
I made him a czar
Certified
yesterday.
yesterday.
Much to his chagrin, is going to talk us through the cleanup priorities advice that the IM team's been working on for fiscal year 2025. So, Chris, the floor is yours.
Respond to a more.
What I'm just going to show today is not the text for wordsmithing. The IM team has had ample opportunity and will have ample opportunity to do that. What I'm showing is the table of what we feel are critical activities to be accomplished in 2025. And to recap a little bit, this differs a little bit from the work advice, cleanup priorities advice that were issued in at least the past several years under Tom Galeotto. In those years, we included in the table not only things that absolutely had to be accomplished, but also things that we felt were important that should be started or completed if funding was available. This year, we were leaving off the important activities because there really are so many of them, and a lot of them don't appear in the 5-year plan or the strategic vision, but nonetheless, they're carried out by the Hanford workforce and are necessary. And we felt that it was just better for whatever the funding allows to let DOE and EPA and ecology prioritize those on their own. So we've concentrated on the things that we felt were priority and had to be accomplished. Now, in the table, we've utilized Brian Vance's bucket where he lumps everything in the 3 categories of tank waste, risk reduction, and infrastructure. We've also added 2 other categories to those. One, some activities that we would like to see be accelerated that either appear on DOE's 5-year plan in years after 2025 or that don't appear on it at all because they're in even further back in the out years. And we understand that to do the accelerated activities, it will require additional funding. And we put it in there because this advice will go to congressional committees, it will go to DOE headquarters, and we feel that possibly we can help DOE get additional money by the wording in the letter as well as putting it in the tables. But we do understand that it takes additional funds, additional appropriations if we want to bring things into 2025. The other thing that we've had in previous years is something called indirect and supporting activities. And these are items that we really feel are critical for any type of work to be accomplished. And I'll talk about those in just a second. We've itemized these things, for example, looking at the take waste treatment as a TWA, TWB, TWC, etc. These do not indicate priorities, they're simply identifiers. TW for tank waste and A, B, and C. So with that, let me go forward a little bit. On the tank waste, we're in agreement with two of the major items in the 5-year plan that DOE presented and that have been talked about extensively actually in the past several meetings where DOE has presented. And they were mentioned as priorities in last Monday as things that are very important to DOE, and that's the DF law. Operating the DF law, not just starting it up, but going into full operations. But what we want to urge DOE to do is to see if they can beat the 5-year or the 3-year ramp up to nominal capacity of amount of glass vitrified per day. Their nominal rate is 21 metric tons of glass per day. And Tom Fletcher said at one of the previous meetings that it's going to take him 3 years. In Susan Leckpan's terminology about sense of urgency that she voiced on Monday night, we would like to urge DOE to see if they can beat that safely, that ramp up time. That's a long ramp up time, 3 years. The second one is TWC, restarting the design and construction of the high level waste facility. We agree. That definitely needs to go forward, and 2025 is the date when it's supposed to start. Now we added TWB. If you remember last year in the Tank Waste Committee, we issued an advice that DOE should have a plan on what to do if a tank leaks. What's the approach going to be? How are they going to communicate to the public in a timely fashion? And DOE and Ecology, in discussing 109B tank leak, as part of their agreement that they reached, they agreed that DOE would produce a plan by August 25th of this year, a tank leak characterization and response plan. So what we're urging them to do, assuming that this is actually completed, go through all the reviews, Ecology signs off on it, we'd like them to implement that plan and make sure that plan is implemented in 2025 and probably in out years beyond that. So that if there is additional tank leaks or for existing tank leaks, that plan can be implemented as written. Now I got a few words from Richard Bloom yesterday from HSEP, and he wanted to add a few words in here dealing to make sure that we used available technology or the best available technology, and he wanted those words added in here. I didn't have time to do it last night. So these are the priorities that we felt we wanted for the tank waste treatment. Again, operate DF law and see if you can beat a 3-year ramp-up period to nominal glass production per day. Start the design and construction of high-level waste and implement the tank leak plan, response plan, which is supposed to be completed late this year. Using Brian Vance's risk reduction category, we agree and feel it's high priority to initiate the transfer of cesium, strontium capsules. And Jan wanted us to insert the word dry in there. So we got dry capsule storage. We wanted to make sure that, again, we initiate the demolition of the K West Basin. And actually, in some responses, input from Tom, Cecilia, and Mia, on the pump and treat, we wrote this to say to maximize plume reduction through pump and treat optimization and source reduction activities, both on the Central Plateau and along the river. Yeah, DOE and contractors have done a really good job with the pump and treat units on reducing plumes, managing plumes and treating groundwater. And we feel that the Columbia River and contamination, avoiding contamination leaking into the Columbia River, have to continue to be a priority. And so we're urging them to continue, especially if there's some problems with funding, shortfalls with funding. We want to make sure that they continue to not to let that impact the groundwater treatment or what they're doing.
Question before you move on to the next, before you move on to RRD, it's about RRD. Should that be TWT instead of RRD?
It's a risk reduction.
Yeah, because in Brian Vance's terminology, everything having to do with the Central Plateau and the river now falls in that risk reduction bucket.
No, I'm talking about the RRD, which is supplemental low activity waste.
Let me get to that.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, this is out of place, but this is a subject of extensive discussion, RRD, in the tank waste committee meeting. And what was there initially that was logical to fall on RRD sort of had to do with plans for shipment of true waste. That subsequently got rewritten to develop and communicate a plan for the testbed initiative, TBI grouting, which then with subsequently suggestions came in from the IM team to reword it as indicated in red ink. In thinking about it, however, what we heard on Monday night is that the testbed initiative right now is funded. And in talking to Rob and actually to Mia, we felt that why should we wait for 2025 to get a plan for the testbed initiative? Why not start a plan right now? Why do we have to wait? And so, and again, talking with Rob, I think we're going to delete this, and in the Grout IM team, that would be a topic for advice on the Grout IM team. What are we going to do with the testbed initiative in terms of the fact that funding's available, plans don't exist for it yet. So I think this will default to the IM Grout team under the tank waste.
I think putting RRD back to transuranic makes a lot of sense, especially because we heard, I think with Mark French on Monday, say that that is one of their budget priorities or cleanup priorities for 25 is to ramp up certification and prepping for the 2028 shipment campaign.
One of the reasons we took it out too, Tom, is that when we talked about this, I think at the pit, John Price was sitting in and he felt that the milestones adequately addressed what was there. And he felt that it wasn't necessary.
It is a board, it's a board
as it was
priority.
written then.
It's still, even though the milestone's there, it is a board priority to get transuranic waste to WIP. And I think supporting DOE's 5-year vision is not a bad thing.
I agree.
Okay, then you give me some words?
Yeah,
Send them to me and I'll put them in.
Yeah, something like transuranic waste, prepared transuranic waste for shipment to WIP.
Restart characterization of
Yeah,
transuranic waste.
Pam and I will work on it. But yeah.
Didn't we just learn that we don't know what the rules are for recertification? Yeah,
Rob, I can get with you offline and tell you what they do.
but isn't that what we said? We didn't hear
That's
that?
not the case. I don't think they're changing things.
I think what we heard though is in 2025 on Monday night, was it Hamill who was talking? Yeah, I think he said either certification to restart certification or restart recertification also in 2025.
Yeah, getting everything ready to start shipping in 2028 or earlier if WIP has capacity earlier. So I think that's an extremely important way to get waste off the site and prevent orphan waste from being stored on the site. So that's got to go into high priority.
And given the accident that happened with the shipment from Los Alamos to WIP, they're going to be more cautious in terms of what they will allow to go there. So we're going to have to do a better job of characterization.
Well, I'm fine with putting it in. I'm not a waste person myself, and I'm sort of ignorant of waste disposal and waste disposition. So if you two can send me the text, I'll be happy to put it in.
Perfect.
No worries, you're the budget czar.
So then would RRD with the potential rewording just go away?
Yeah, all the text in here, Rob said he'd be happy to start addressing that in the IM team for grout. Whatever comes out of that with regard to the test bed initiative.
Perfect.
And we ran that by Mia too, and Mia said she felt that was a better place to handle this and the discussions and what came out of that.
Accelerated cleanup.
In terms of moving on, accelerated cleanup activities, again, these three items here, well, two items, A and C, waste characterization of certain trenches, cribs in 200 CW5. Well, A, the adaptive milestones kind of kicked them out to where we don't know yet. We'd really like to see those started because you can start characterization, and that's not a terribly expensive activity necessarily relative to remediation. And the RIFS documents are going to be massive on these things because at least at the time I retired, there was a lot of characterization extending over a number of years. So we're looking at long time periods. And I think if we can do anything to accelerate the submittal RIFS documents, I think that would be a good thing. We understand that it's going to take money, however. Ditto the cribs. Actually, if you look at the latest version, Rev 1 of the Remedial Action Work Plan, they're supposed to start this year on CW5, PW136. That's what the schedule calls for in Rev 1, 2021 of the RAWP. There's no funds for it, however, yeah, and so nothing is being done. So we'd like to see funding for it and see if you can at least begin to meet the schedule that's in that RAWP work plan.
Can I ask a question? Aren't those waste sites, the PW?
Yeah, Z-cribs.
There's Z-cribs. That's screaming hot stuff in there.
And it's transuranic probably, so it needs to go to WIP. So
Yeah.
it makes sense to get it started, yeah.
Yeah, and John Price said that he felt that at least some of these sites in CW5, I think, maybe it's one of the PW ones, might contain transuranic waste.
Absolutely.
Oh, it does.
Hundreds of kilograms of plutonium, yeah.
Now on B, I have to check the 5-year plan when we get home. Because I think we heard today that they wanted to, and maybe I didn't hear it right, that they wanted to complete excavation of the 300-296 waste site to meet a milestone in November.
November 24, which is fiscal year 25. Right?
And I was thinking in the 5-year plan, it was 2026. And that's why we moved it up into here. So I need to check that.
Yeah. I think that's the milestone for soil removal is November 24, so that's in fiscal 25.
Right.
But the deactivation got moved up from 26 to 25 in our letter here.
Yeah. And so I need to check that to see when the soil removal is. I thought it was 2026. Otherwise, I wouldn't have put it in here. So it might be that if in fact it's 2025, then we might move this as a high priority advice to the risk reduction area rather than keep it in accelerated. Because we don't want to let that slide. Now, the indirect supporting activities, actually what Tom said today gives a lot of emphasis to our ISA, and that's workforce issues. If they're have been losing 25% of their workforce per year, which astounded me, that's tremendously high. And I know that in the Central Plateau, CPCCO, they've been averaging 50 to 60 postings for job openings every week for the past year, and at fairly senior positions. I think what we'd like to see DOE do, and urge them to do, is to put out a plan that really takes into account the demographic workforce trends, that in the country that we're seeing kind of written about right now quite a bit. We have declining birth rates, we have a declining workforce. We have increasing amount of people taking early retirement. The baby boomers are taking retirement, early or not. So I think there's going to be a substantial workforce demographics, just due to pure demographics, that I think DOE is going to have to address. And we're not talking necessarily about next year or the year after, but if this cleanup is going to take 50 years, looking into the future, there could be a really tremendous workforce issue 20, 30, 40 years from now, and not having enough workers to do the job. So that's what ISAA is urging DOE to do, is to put out a plan, communicate the plan, make it public, get input to it. What are they going to do for the workforce to make sure that the 50-year schedule can be met and they have the workers to do it?
Esteban, did I see your hand?
Well, just something else, because as a person who's working in the census, I think you're right on that, Chris. I think that's something DOE really needs to consider, especially, I think, with the work that the Census Bureau has lately done on like the demographics and the, like the job shifts and everything, especially for this area, the Pacific Northwest. They really need to implement some kind of plan on how you're going to fill those jobs, especially like I said, after hearing the statistics on turnover.
Thank you. And on ISIB, this goes back to funding issues again. When DOE presented the 5-year plan last fall, they said it was based upon assumed $2.7 billion per year flat funding. And this was the work that they felt could get done with $2.7 billion a year. If you look at the life cycle plan, $2.7 billion a year isn't gonna get the job done if that plan is even remotely correct for the cost and the schedule, because there are multiple years that are going to require from $5 to $7 billion in there, and in fact, the budgets for the last several years and even in 2023, they're not compliant with the cost in that plan. They're not compliant budgets. So what we would like to do is for DOE to tell us, if you're going to get flat funding, how is that going to impact your cost, schedule, and scope in terms of getting the work done on this site? Now, we heard Monday night that they got the highest budget ever, and it went from 2.7 something last year to 2.84 this year. Okay. That's still nowhere near compliant for the life cycle plan. And it's not a heck of a lot over the $2.7 billion. So we'd like we'd like DOE to tell us, if you get flat funding, what's the impact gonna be? And that's what we put in the IM team, for this year. So in terms of discussion here, I'm gonna get some wording from Pam and from Tom on True, and that'll go in the risk, back in the risk reduction. And I'll check and see on 324, but regardless when the dates are, I'll probably move that to the risk reduction too, because that falls under what DOE, how they're bucketing their work. So if there's any other comments from anybody online or from in the room, I'd sure like to hear them.
I was gonna say that I understand the president's budget's being released this week or next week.
Today?
Today, okay. And,
Yeah, today or
how
tomorrow.
should we read it? Should we get into it and take should we?
Well,
should we look at his increases? Are we able to
So
say?
let me just give you a little political
That's
perspective.
24 though, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Senator Murray now chairs the entire Appropriations Committee,
Yeah.
not just the subcommittee. And the chair of the Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee in the House is Congressman Lujan from, not New Mexico, he's from Oak Ridge. And we're in the best shape we have been in my 28 years following DOE. So don't freak out. But I mean, we need to do our due diligence, but we're in a darn fine position.
And remember last year, the president's budget came in pretty low for Hanford. And the congressional committees, you know, Washington and Oregon got together, they put pressure on. Patty Murray really stepped up and put pressure on and got us to where we are, the 2023 budget to where we are today. So I would expect that if the president's budget came in low again, that there's going to be extensive negotiations in Congress, one way or the other, to try and step it up. We don't know what that's going to be. We just have to wait.
So, and a reminder, the president's budget that's coming out today is 2024. This is on 2025.
That's right.
Yeah, I think, and just to quote, and I think Rob, to transfer that question, like Pam said, I think you shouldn't put so much emphasis on when it comes to news, because I think like what just Pam said, following up, I think you all know, I think the advocacy and the big purpose of the hat, you know the folks that you need to reach out to, because I think, you know, more than, I think, you know, like Pam said, yeah, you know, you got Patty Murray, you got Senator Congresswoman McMorris Rogers, you know, at the energy, but she's the chair of the energy, but I mean, don't put too much emphasis. I mean, you all know the folks, and, you know, the focus on here in the area and who are your representatives, because that's who you're going to need to, especially, you know, everybody on this board, to those relationships.
Because, I mean, they can't do it without good documentation.
So I've got Gary and Ryan, I saw both hands at some point.
The one thing to think about on the advice, and it's good advice, you see there, Chris, is that the department would really like to say that the advice is actionable. And one thing that caused last year's advice to be not actionable was a lot of the projects that the board wanted pulled forward. And once you started adding up the price tag on that, you were looking at about $4 billion, which, you know, it wasn't going to be there.
You have to give us the numbers.
And I don't want to try to influence the advice, but I just want to throw this out as something to chew on, is that the 5-year plan as presented pretty much follows the flat budget of 2.7 billion or so. Trying to add too much over and above could take an actionable piece of advice to not actionable. So we need to consider how some things are worded. If additional monies become available, could you do X?
In the text, Gary, there's a paragraph where we explicitly explain this accelerated, and we understand that it takes more money. idea is to try and help get more money.
Sure.
We're not expecting this to be done under 2.7. I think we're pretty clear on that in the text above the table.
Another thing that would be helpful as well is, you've heard Brian Vance talk about the virtuous circle, where good work out on site, we tell about the work that's done on site to our various stakeholder groups. Our stakeholder groups then turn around and provide additional support and talk to funding leaders, things like that, so we get the money so we can go out and do more work. So that's that virtuous circle. One action begets another good action. One of the things that the department would also like for you to consider is maybe a commitment from the HAB to turn around to your stakeholder groups to have some of that support. And last year, there were several groups that banded together and wrote letters in support of additional funding, and that's helpful. Of course, obviously, the department can't lobby for more, but your stakeholder groups can. There were about 5 letters that I'm aware of. Their ecology sent one out. There was one that had several stakeholders in this group signed that, and several others. If the HAB would commit to doing that, using your stakeholder bodies to doing something like that, to continue that piece of the virtuous circle, that would be helpful as well.
With the disclaimer that you can't say that it's coming from the HAB when you write that letter. That's the only disclaimer.
So one of the resources you have, you may not know you have it. So all 3 of the TPA agencies have the same issue. None of them can lobby, right? They're government agencies that can't lobby.
No.
Pardon?
That's the federal government.
The federal government,
We
no,
have
you
some
can.
very, I'm not well versed on it, but we have some very specific rules and stuff around it, but that's not necessarily the case for
Yeah,
state.
because David has talked about going back to DC
Okay.
to meeting with people.
We actually have, and I'm gonna probably say the wrong terms here, but we've brought on a lobbyist in DC, and we can kind of talk about it at some future HAB meeting. But they've actually started working with us, and we actually just kicked off a couple months ago.
And the director of the Oregon Department of Energy hand-delivered a letter that was co-written by our department and Oregon Heifer Cleanup Board to congressionals when she was in DC last month. So.
Yeah, and if I could offer some quick feedback on, Hammer, I touched on some of it. The Energy Communities Alliance sent a letter, the Environmental Council of the State sent a letter. Last August, Ecology, Washington, Oregon, and 9 or 10 other organizations, including Columbia Riverkeeper Hanford Challenge, the local unions, and a bunch of others, they all sent a letter. I think Governor Ensley sent an individual letter to Shalonda Young, probably an Oregon's letter. So there's been, like we discussed about, there's been a bunch of effort behind it, and we're going to keep that momentum.
Well, and just recently on February 24th, a whole lot of community letters went out.
Yeah,
TRIDAC
so,
passed on to us a whole slew of letters.
Yeah, and a lot of the letters TRIDAC sent you guys is those letters in the last 6 months.
Support adequate funding.
So the translation of that is TRIDAC wrote a letter to the HAB chair and attached a bunch of those letters all at once. And so there is a single link now, because that got thrown into the correspondence system, where you all can find them.
And in fact, that'll be a topic of discussion at the IM team, but we have words addressing those 5 letters and a link to them now. There will be a link to them to gain support from the organizations that wrote those. We just have to make sure, as Tom said, that it's understood that this is not a product of the HAB. It's a product of other outside organizations.
And on that note, just to follow up on Ryan on the quote, Gary, I think from a person who holds a public at large seat, that's a lot of the work that I think needs to get done, especially with a lot of the unknowns.
Yeah, so I finished Miles real quick. Rosen finished in the chat. Yakima Nation sent a letter. That's correct. Yeah, they sent their letter the same day. The other 12 sent theirs, and then the other one I'm thinking of was the entire Washington congressional delegation, you know, both
Yes.
sides of the aisle, they all sent a letter back in October as well.
Yeah.
So
So there's a
Gary,
link
I
to
just
that
want to
and have
say
that.
that we are part of that virtuous circle as
Yes.
well. So, I mean, individually is what you're talking about, but I think that our advice becomes a part of that support for the
Yes.
5-year plan.
Right.
And also, there's a lot of money available for infrastructure right now, which I think could be spotted to individual projects that are being called out. And we know that it happens every year. And we also know that, that Rob has been showing us this plug-in thing, which is also using the budgets that we have for more than what we planned for. So I think that the work is well advised.
Sure, sure. And with the support of the various stakeholder groups of the HAB, maybe we might get a bigger checkbook next year. But it's one of those things where the department is doing the best work it can with the money that's available, and we're going to be good stewards with how many ever dollars the department receives. At some point, those budgets will go down. It's just kind of an economic fact out there. But in the meantime, your support is coveted, appreciated, and the more letters of support that we can receive, you know, that you could consider writing on behalf is much appreciated.
Now, I want to put out a caveat too, and I mentioned this when I kind of gave an overview to the HAB board last fall. If you look at the work that's in DOE's 5-year plan, I remember right there, something like 12 projects, 12 work activities that are supposed to be completed in 2024. If those projects aren't completed and they slide into 2025, then that means that no matter what the priority of some of these things are here, they could slide into late 2025 or even in 2026. And certainly that's not going to appear in the text or in the table, but just something to bear in mind, you know, for us around the table here and have that schedule slip and cost increase. And a good example of this is problems with the melter right now. By the time, my own personal feeling is from what we heard on Monday night, by the time they get the new parts in mid-April, late April, put them in, do the testing, ramp up, we could have slipped 9 months to a year on melter heat up. Now, the domino effects are gonna carry on for when they start cold commissioning, their operational readiness review and hot commissioning. So we just need to be aware that schedule slippage happens.
Thank you, Chris.
So is, okay, I was just gonna ask, how is the integration between the adaptive milestone and the 5-year plan? And do we need to do a check and balance to make sure our milestones are being met in the 5-year plan?
Can we table that for open forum after lunch? Because that's a really good discussion. It's gonna take more than 5 minutes to get through, I think.
And that was one of the cross-cutting topics that we sort of had in the ops committee with milestones up there. Because of our schedule implications, cost implications, scope implications, whatever, but I think it goes beyond what we have here in the next few minutes.
I think I'm really excited about the adaptive milestones.
Yeah.
Clearing up a lot of back stuff that, you know, is sore. And this goes forward, but are we actually making that?
Yeah, make it bite-sized. Okay, I think we've had a pretty productive morning so far. Let's come back after lunch and have a productive afternoon. And thank you, everybody, for your engagement and your presence. One last thing, the plug-in approach should be circulated.
Yeah.
Let's kick it off.
Yeah, well, welcome back from lunch. Those of you who came back from lunch. We've got some stragglers that aren't back yet in the room, so. The next thing on the agenda is open forum. And for those of you who are new to the board, Open forum is a time where anyone can talk about anything that's remotely related to Hanford. Don't usually do sort of business stuff in open forum, but if you got something on your mind, you throw it out there and you have a conversation. And come back with some follow-up, but most of the time it's just for us to talk amongst ourselves. On the agenda, there's a update on the transuranic, mixed and transuranic waste IM call, which should be backwards. It should be transuranic mixed IM call.
Oh, sorry.
So we've got an IM team. It might be one of the longest standing IM teams on the HAB. It's gone through 3 different IM team leads, and we're making progress, finally. Got some new energy with Rob Davis's comments at the last full board meeting about WIP and ecology's letter. And we're gonna be looking to get a draft of that IM team advice, a draft of that advice out of the IM team in May and to the RAF for consideration in June, and then get it to the full board in August, assuming RAF passes it through. So far, it's like a page and a half, and it's like record brevity. So that's the official bit of the agenda of open forum. We already talked about the committee discussion of operations work group recommendations for HAB committee optimization. It's a lot of words to talk about the committee of the whole that happened yesterday, just yesterday.
It was yesterday.
It's been a long couple days. Yeah, so that's moving forward as well, so stay tuned. And before we went to lunch, Rob was talking about the adaptive milestone approach and how that ties into the 5-year vision and cleanup priorities. I think that's a good topic to kick us off. So Rob, why don't you get seated if you want to jump in, or you want to take a breath first?
We don't have anybody from EPA on, just so you know. We've got 15 people online, so there's more people online than in the room.
So I guess the point I was saying is that when we take a look at this overview of the 5-year plan, and a lot of the activities that appear on there are part of our adaptive milestone list. And so, I just kind of curious, are we on schedule for these within our adaptive milestones? Or is it still too early on the next 3-year adaptive milestone to know that this is going to be included in the 26 and 27?
Most of the adaptive milestones will appear in the next 3 periods, where they decide what to do with them or not what to do with them.
And you have to realize that it's not a 3-year moving window that they come up with new adaptive milestones.
Every 3 years.
It's every 3 years. So it's not like they're gonna be picking adaptive milestones next year for the next 3-year window. So we won't know how the alignment is until 3 years from now. It's counterintuitive.
Well, okay. So how would they know to budget it if they come ask that last?
Good question. I think there are probably a couple of comments about that in the adaptive milestone commentary.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's the problem.
It is a room for improvement. It's not a problem.
do we have a feeling on the important? Oh, they're all important.
Yeah. I'm trusting that the
Look at
TPA
Larry,
agencies.
he's cracking up.
Trusting that the TP agencies can work through that concern and make sure that the milestones are achievable and.
So do you think that Brian, this next year is gonna give us another updated 5-year plan?
I'm hoping that we get a new 5-year plan in October, yeah.
Yeah,
It's a rolling.
It's a rolling plan.
right.
Yes, so the year that's been completed will drop off, and then you'll see the next one, which is.
This is the third one, right?
Yes, it's a fairly new tool.
Right.
And so you'll see 22 drop off of next year's and 28 added.
Okay.
And any updates that, if something gets pulled forward, or if for some reason it couldn't get completed, will get pushed back. And a lot of ways to read it. If you take a look on the 22, you've got some check marks and you've got some carrots. The check marks means that was accomplished, and the carrots or the arrows or whatever, not complete. Probably got pushed over into the next fiscal year. So that's pretty much that legend. And while the desire is to get everything done within that fiscal year, sometimes things happen, like we were talking about 324 and coming across unexpected items. COVID has dramatically changed the supply chain that we knew 3 years ago. Workers, things like that, so.
Well, everyone's as excited as I am about 2028 when whip shipments start again, so.
And the other thing to realize about this 5-year plan is it only includes things to initiate or complete. It doesn't have continue on there.
Ongoing, yeah.
So if something's a long-term effort, you'll see it initiated at intermediate, continue. So.
The complete.
The ongoing work is implied.
Pardon?
Ongoing work is implied. But yeah, so it'll be interesting to see, I think, how the 5-year plan and the adaptive milestones commingle, for sure. I'm hoping that eventually the adaptive milestones become more adaptive than every 3 years and sort of go year by year and say, well, what are we doing on the 6th year or the 4th year out, as opposed to just next year or this year, which you get, yeah.
Right.
I'd forgotten what adaptive milestones are.
So the Central Plateau had a series of milestones that were in abeyance, and the TPA agencies met and discussed ways to make smaller bite-sized chunks based on a flat budget, and are then putting clusters of these bite-sized chunks into a 3-year smallish scope, short-term milestone. And then the rest of the 14 milestones that are in abeyance are going to be addressed down the road in the next 3-year adaptive milestone window. Did I get it right?
Yeah.
Sounds about right, yeah.
Okay.
The other interesting thing too is the life cycle report that was released last year ago, February. All the adaptive milestones were shown as being started in that report. So when the next one comes out in 2025, it'll be interesting to see where they appear in the timeline and schedule.
So it's almost like we need a 10-year calendar that has like different frequency check marks. We need where the CERCLA 5-year reviews are, where the TPA 5-year reviews are, where the adaptive milestone 3-year reviews are, and where the life cycle scope reporting 3-year reviews are. That might help for our planning of timely advice.
Do the regulators have that?
Sorry, a list of all the reviews or what?
Just
Calendar.
we now have a calendar. We now have like 6 or 7 different products that are either 5-year or 3-year renewal cycles. So is there just like a year where there's a circular review and a blue dot when there's a.
Yeah, I'd have to double check with my management staff. I'm not sure if they divvy that up depending on section for, which relevant review is relevant to which section. I have to follow up on that and see what the section managers are doing for that. I know from the communication standpoint, I don't have like a set thing saying, here's the look ahead for the next 5 to 10 years, but I do think that our managers do have some
level of look ahead. I'll have to look into that.
I've been toying with the idea of generating a timeline of sorts with that, but then also, here's when this cleanup or regular decision is scheduled. You know, because a lot of them are 2035, 2040 for the Central Plateau, we're expecting a record of decision. Having that sort of context to say, okay, well, what's happening between here? And then you can look and say, okay, well, we're de-4ing this complex in the next 5 years. Maybe that's something that could be right for advice.
You know, the unit manager's reports that I said earlier being a rap sheet, each of those reports every month has a comprehensive list of milestones linked to specific work, and a status update is given.
There's milestones.
So there's a lot of information there about milestones and where they stand, whether they're at risk, on schedule, or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I
So,
guess if we did, yeah, go ahead, Jay.
So it's a question really for you, Gary, or you, Mike, if you could entertain it. My question is just like an impression. I got the impression that the first 5-year placemat was going to last for like some time, that it was going to be a statement of what they were about to do, and that it was going to kind of move forward in time with those years. But that somewhere along the line, there was a caution issued, maybe from headquarters, that said that this was not the best way to look for funding support. Is this placemat had to, the format needed to change. And do you know about that?
It's Mike. I don't have any information on that.
Like I say, it's very vague, but that the format did change, and it comes out every year now.
And you're correct with your memory there, is that we had to change the format slightly because the White House is uncomfortable talking about unfunded work in the future. So trying to connect budgets and projects in the out years was something that we had originally tried to do that we were told we can't do. We can just list some plans of goals.
So in a way, the idea of doing the budget advice into the out years is a good strategy, because it makes a possibility for the Hanford community to be making recommendations for funding when the placemat couldn't.
The further out we go, the more actionable it is.
As it turns out, but you have to learn that.
Well, there are other reasons too, and the fact that this project is so long. The normal project management tools of setting a project goal in 5 years or whatever can be accomplished, where here we've got 15, 20, we've got multi-years to do. The second thing is that every time we fail a milestone, mud got slung on DOE and ecology and everybody there. And so we spent so much time repairing that when there was really nothing to repair there. It was a milestone that we recognized we either didn't have it or couldn't achieve it by that period of time. And I think that going with this rolling or adaptive milestone, it has got a chance of really improving that. But we have to make sure they meet milestones and what are the checks and balances that they are. And are we supposed to go through and look at these that are at and say, yep, that meets our intention of a milestone, and that does too. And we got to make sure we get it in order for us to feel comfortable they're accomplishing something.
Yeah, and that's sort of like what Chris noticed with 324 on the 5-year. It says that the work is going to be a year after the milestone. So we're recommending that they meet the milestone, basically. Using the milestones themselves to create the timeline is probably a good broad brush, but you understand that those are not the most reliable dates. Hopefully the adaptive milestones are reliable.
I mean, I really hope the adaptive milestone approach really works. I think it can. I think slinging mud on people for not making something because of things they can't control is not a good idea. We are accomplishing so much out here, it's incredible. Then people think, oh, it's the same old damn, but they're never doing anything. It's a waste of money.
And you gotta have.
I hate that.
The expectations in the budget have to meet somewhere.
Yeah.
And if you can make your expectations in line with the budget, you're more likely to have successes.
Right.
Well, the other thing too is DOE's earned value management system, you know, which as you look at spending on a project basis, it requires you actually to kind of budget in advance.
Yeah.
And so inherent in that project management accounting system is you are looking ahead. And so to some degree, the milestones and everything else are reflecting the fact that you gotta look ahead just by the fact that that's how your accounting system works. So there's that aspect of it too.
Yeah. And that's something we've consistently been looking for when we do the work plan development is a look ahead for the 6th through 8th year. Because we need to be able to provide timely, actionable advice. And providing advice on something that's already been budgeted and planned is not as helpful. You know, going into looking at the 2025 budget even, when DOE already has a sort of rough outline of what they're gonna try to submit for, that's not as helpful as if we could look at the 27 through 29 timeframe and, you know, start saying, hey, remember this? We need to make sure that that gets on the priority list.
But,
There's
you know,
some interesting information in chat.
Oh.
But what's interesting about what you just said too, Tom, is when they presented the 5-year plan in October, they're talking about this, but in their presentation, they didn't go beyond 2025 because they said beyond that, it gets too iffy and too speculative.
Right.
So you have a 5-year plan, but they only talked to 2025 because beyond that, they felt it'd be too speculative.
So maybe it's not advice on the, it's not advice on the when, but on the what and how, more than.
So what is this, can we hear what's?
So, yeah, we keep forgetting that now that we're at hybrid, not everybody can see chat. So 2 things, I'm gonna go back to chat. John Price came to RAP in February 2022, so basically a year ago, and did a presentation on milestones and the adaptive management milestone stuff. So that's online at hanford.gov, and back to chat. So folks, if you're in chat, I'm gonna put you in queue because the folks in the room can't, oh my God. Okay, this is long.
Who's it from?
Liz Mattson, can you summarize what you put in here? Because the folks in the room, it's very tiny print on the screen.
Hi, everybody. Sorry. I just was putting in, when the adaptive milestone approach came out for the comment period, it's really it's complicated on many levels. And so we put together a lot of resources related to it. And Mia can add them to Teams or however you guys are tracking things. But I wanted to share some things because, I mean, I was even trying to remember, like, what was this all about? But what would be interesting if we could get an update at some point is about the company that was hired to create a computer model to set deadlines. They didn't use that computer model for the last comment period related to the adaptive milestone series, but they were going to use it in the future as we understood it, with the idea that it would set more realistic target dates for completing work. So it's too long for me to read all this stuff to you guys, but the summary is there's a lot of resources we created because we were like, what is going on? This is really confusing. So this might help jog people's memory. And I don't know if there is an update on the computer model, but if there is, that would be super helpful to learn about. Thanks.
That's a really good comment because I had forgotten that they were using a computer model. but it was sort of, it wasn't completed and it was kind of in a, interim stage or preliminary state or whatever.
Yeah, that's definitely something that's on our list to follow up for, and maybe that's on getting into some ideas about the work plan, for sure.
But we're completing the first year of using the adaptive milestone, so
Yeah.
maybe in the next meetings, you can get a report on that.
The comment window was, ended in June?
Let me see, let's say this
Yeah, I can double
presentation
check the
say.
Yeah, I didn't think it was
Public
implemented
outreach
yet,
and
I thought it was still under
education, so-
development.
Perspective.
Well, it sounds like the computer part is.
Yeah, it's just in review and in comment and.
Yeah, I think the milestones actually came out late 2022. So we're just now entering the first year.
All right, tri-parties have conceptual agreement on 13 new milestones for fiscal year 2023 and 2024.
So this.
I'm just reading it off of John's
Yeah,
presentation.
this year,
The comment period was July 5th last year through August 19th last year.
yeah, so they're finalized like late last year, but they already taken effect for some stuff that's hitting now.
Right, and the other 14 milestones that had been suspended, the TPA agencies were working to set new dates for those 14 in late 2022. So that would probably just have happened. This is, like I said, this is a presentation from a year ago.
I'm also dropping in the chat the responsiveness summary that was published a couple months after the comment period.
I'm wondering if maybe that's not cross-cutting enough to see if the agencies are going to include it in their briefs in April. If there are any milestones.
One thing to note, Tom, is that the note we had was that negotiation for the next batch, 2024 to 2027, will start in 2023. So it seems appropriate to ask for that update at the briefing.
Yeah, it might not be quite ripe in April, but certainly sometime this year. That was a good topic.
So does that get captured in notes from this meeting that we will ask for that, or how does that proceed?
Two things can happen. We've got the chair and the vice chair in the room, and if it's a possibility in April, maybe EIC can take that up. Next June, we're going to be talking about the RAP's contribution to the HAB work plan. And we can make sure that that is on the work plan for next fiscal year, starting in October.
So I have a kind of a general question out of left field. I've got the impression, well, there's a budget and contracts committee, but I never hear anything about contracts. Is there anything we collectively need to know or should know about contracts in Hanford?
Yes.
When I first came out, I asked Gary if we could have a kind of a contracts 101. Not that there's any particular issues, but that it came up periodically, at least in my first year and a half. Concerns about the end states contracting model, what it was, so on and so forth, how it was working. And if you look on site under contracts like for RL, CPCCO, you will see their conform contract, the entire contract they have. You will see all the task orders, and you will see that the task orders have changed significantly. So it's not so different from the old contract type, because they're not issuing task orders for every bit of work, but issued now one task order for all work, all remediation work. And they keep updating it, so at the end, it's going to exactly equal what was appropriated to RL.
So is that far enough down in the weeds that it's something we don't need to?
It's pretty far down in the weeds, and you can look it up on Hanford.gov. they have all the contracts for all the prime contractors. You can see what they are. If they're task orders, you can read the task orders, you can see what they are. The task orders relate to specific sections in section C, which are the scope of work, and you can see how they relate. And it's all there in the public domain.
And it used to be that BCC would get sort of a gut check response to pre-decisional contracts before they were released. So they'd have like 10 days to say, this is a problem, or we like it, or it wouldn't be long enough to have actual advice, but they could informally weigh in. We don't do that anymore.
Well, the contracts have been issued a couple of years ago at this point. I don't think there's anything in play right now, but they have workshops. And so they have had a participant, Gary Karnofsky, was awesome because he'd worked at Hammer and he understood the contracts, and he was really good at representing the HAB issues and in the context of Hanford contracting. And I participated in those as Hanford Communities. David Reblog was there. But they're now underway, and I think it'd be really interesting to see if these end states are working or not.
And the tank's operation hasn't been awarded yet, but other than that, the rest of them are, right?
Well, there was a little bit of a problem in that the former Hanford site manager was hired by one of the companies to be on their contract team. So it was ready to be awarded and it got tanked, so to speak.
Was that what happened to the?
But I think, a lot, especially new people aren't familiar with how DOE works in contracts.
Yeah.
And that's why when I was talking with Gary, I said contracting 101. Starting with the RFP that's written in the Cincinnati Environmental Office and what you do, how do you become a prime contractor, how are you evaluated, and they're just basic things.
So Dan's in queue, but I do want to say it could be right for like a 1-hour webinar that isn't necessarily at a HAB meeting, but if there's interest in outreach and having someone create a media snippet that could describe how Hanford contracting works, that would be a resource for not just the HAB, but the general public. That might be a fun idea. Maybe Pick can talk about that.
Now, earlier this year too, I posted a number of items in Teams about end states contracts. And they describe end state contracts really succinctly, what DOE hopes to get out of them, so on and so forth. Then if I remember right, there was a GAO report or something like that that said, these things aren't working quite like DOE wants for these reasons. And so they're on Teams.
Okay.
We got folks in queue. I've got Dan and Mike Birkenbile. Dan, you've been waiting a while.
Thank you. This kind of a new subject, the WTP, or for those folks that are new, the waste treatment plant, or more in plain English, the high level waste vitrification plant, which is coming up. I'm wondering, and I'm sure probably DOE is doing this, is taking a look at the legacy equipment associated with that plant and trying to take the lessons learned from the failed legacy equipment that is with the low-level waste vitrification plant, particularly the control system for the startup heaters, which I guess were untested and have caused delays. So I'm wondering if the DOE is, and hopefully they are, taking a look at the legacy equipment, untested legacy equipment associated with the high-level vitrification plant, and seeing if there's some way they can get ahead of what happened at the low-level waste vitrification plant. And also the nuclear waste technical review board, those folks were on site. Was anybody in the room or online in that meeting? And can we have some sort of kind of small report on that? Thank you.
That's tomorrow.
Oh, it's tomorrow? Okay. Well, hopefully somebody will be there and give us a report.
Is it the defense board?
The vice chair of the DNFSC
Right,
is
okay, yeah,
in
I didn't call it back, that's all.
And I'm sure the goal is not to have equipment that's been sitting at the WTP end up in Erdek. because it doesn't work anymore. So I'm sure DOE is looking at that before they start up. Mr. Birkenbauer?
No comment.
So is there other high-level waste, high-level waste other than what's in the tanks going to be vitrified that's coming from your department, Tom?
I don't have any high-level waste coming from my department. I just want to go there and say that.
What's up, 9:30, high-level waste in Oregon?
Yeah. High-level waste, or radioactive waste of all forms is prohibited of disposal in Oregon, so start there. We are, there are a number of wastes that could, if you look at them a little differently, be considered to be high-level waste, and we've had conversations over the years to try to get some clarity on that. Those conversations are collaborative. None of those wastes are being disposed yet, so it's not right for, really raising alarms. But, we mentioned the German logs earlier. Those are simulated high-level waste that are vitrified in canisters, and they're glass logs. They're just sitting out on the site. They don't have a disposition yet. That's a good example that almost everyone agrees that they don't have a disposition yet. But they're not ready to be disposed yet, so nothing's classified until it's ready to be disposed officially. So yes and no.
Not to interrupt real quick, Tom, we've been having some video issues with the owl's been freezing. I've turned it off and on, but I can't do a full reset unless we completely reset it. That being said, we only have like an hour left of the meeting. I'm not sure if you want to stick with just the audio or if you want to pause and do a full reset, but.
It seems like that owl is working.
Yeah, so I did turn them off. I did turn the visual off and on again, and it kind of fixes half of it, but I just wanted to give you that heads up.
Can I try unplugging this one?
I'd probably need to contact IT first because it might mess with the mics and stuff too.
Does anyone have an objection online to not being able to see me wave my hands when I'm talking?
Mike seems happy.
Larry is smiling.
Maybe
All is good.
Let's go with the broken owl. At least the sound is working, and that's good. Okay.
So did we cover everything we needed to under open forum?
Open forum is still open. Had some good conversations about milestones and waste treatment plant obsolescence and high-level waste. What are we missing? What's on people's minds? What's coming up nationally on the EM meeting schedule that might be fun to sit in on some webinars if they exist? Anything?
So DOE's publication that came out on Sunday had a summary of waste management. It's worth looking at, the various presentations and panels.
That was at the waste conference down in Arizona.
Yeah, it was last week.
Yeah, that's right.
There was a big Hanford panel.
Was that in the HAB update?
No, it's a publication comes out of DOE headquarters on Sundays. And it's, mostly it's PR stuff from each of the sites, but this is a summary of panel conversations.
There's a couple things that were very interesting and we hit many years ago was the work being done to, in the riparian zone and the work being done to have the appetite barriers and that. And of course, they've been in place and I think they're still putting some in place. And I think that's a success we ought to hear about and do something.
So, yeah, the last time we got a brief on 100N was probably 2 years ago. And it's my understanding that we should be expecting a proposed plan for the final record of decision by the end of this year. And the work to install the appetite barriers had been halted until the final proposed plan is out. So there haven't been any new barriers added. But they do have a lot of data coming out of there. The other place that
They have places where they want to put barriers.
Yeah.
Yes.
That will be in the proposed plan and the record of decision.
Did a report on the 300 area and what's happened there.
That's the other thing I was just thinking, the uranium sequestration with the polyphosphate injection that happened 4 years ago, because it was right after I started.
Right.
That there's data out now. It's a little noisy. It's hard to tell whether, the 300 area has a pretty low gradient. So as the river stage rises and falls, the contaminated water sort of just sloshes around back and forth. It's not actually getting to the river, but it's not, so it's hard to tell from the data whether the noise in the data is just that sloshing and you haven't seen the polyphosphate injections sequester the uranium yet, or whether it's not working or what. So
Historically, the plume gets really big at high water.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so now, I haven't looked at it in a number of years, but it shrinks when the river level goes down, at least it historically did. So I've not seen the data since they put the chemicals in to see what it did, but, yeah, it's from old trenches that leaked into the river.
Sequestration and appetite sounds like a...
So is the appetite barrier, is it a physical or chemical barrier?
It is a permeable reactive barrier. So they inject, I think it's crystal apatite.
Yeah, but
powder.
But basically, it kind of works like hydration reactions, where it sends out fingers to lock it in as far as it gets to chew. But then, and that's kind of how it kind of holds up the physical barrier part of it. And then there's a chemical part that may attract those metal ions with the phosphate, and metal ions are positive and so these are negative, and so they.
And it's designed to capture strontium-90. Strontium-90 is a radionuclide that gets absorbed by bones. And apatite is the same chemical composition as the material that makes your teeth. So it's sort of like a bone. So it seems to, from what I've seen, it seems to reduce concentrations about 90% on a first pass. The issue is that once you have that 90% reduction, you're still above standard passing through because concentrations are so hot going into the barrier. So I know Ecology was recommending a second smaller barrier as a polishing step. But yeah, that's all going to come out in the proposed plan, I hope, and we'll be able to comment on it. Chris?
If you look at the latest annual groundwater monitoring report, they'll have a section on 100N, and they'll show exactly where the plumes are, strontium plume in relation to the apatite barrier. And there's a little bit of strontium leaking through the barrier. I think if I read the plume map right, it gets a little hard to read, but it doesn't seem to be going around the ends of the barrier. But I would recommend taking a look at that annual groundwater monitoring report, the latest one, and you'll get a pretty good idea of what's happening at end. It won't tell you anything about the proposed plan or the ROD to come, but what's been done, you can get an idea of whether it's effective, how effective, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and I think right now they have 1,000 feet or so of the barrier installed, and the plan is to go 1,700 feet. Don't quote me on that. So it sounds like we've got some topics that are good for discussing.
Rose has a question.
Rose.
Thank you. Yeah, I just kind of wanted to add to this conversation. Yakima Nation has been in both cultural and technical conversations with Department of Energy, Ecology, and EPA with regards to the N area, the apatite barrier. We've had meetings with DOE on this specific topic for the last, well, they went back further, but specifically in the last 4 years or so, we've been having meetings with them discussing the effectiveness of the apatite barrier and some of the, I guess, questions that we have with regards to the additional potential impacts of using the appetite barrier. And I just want to put it out there just so folks know that we're actively having consultation with DOE, both on a technical level and a cultural level, for the this particular area, for this particular topic. And I don't know if that will affect their timeline. I suspect that it might. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out there, that we are actively engaging in this with the tri-party.
We can still look at what's happened.
Yeah, and I definitely appreciate that sort of input and consideration.
Would Rose like to give a presentation on that? I mean, could you?
Is that something that the Yakima Nation would be interested in talking to the RAP about?
You know, let me talk to the team about that. I'm going to be hesitant and certainly committing to anything like that, mainly because, like I say, we are actually in active technical conversations. And I mean, I'm going to be honest and upfront with the group. You know, we have some issues with this moving forward, and those issues have not been resolved. And what, you know, bottom line is kind of some of what that we've been told we're not really seeing in the data and whatnot, especially with regards to the capture rate and whatnot. And I've seen the charts, I've seen the graphs, and you know, over the course of the last 4 years or so, 4 or 5 years. And so I'm going to probably say that at this point, we really need to, I don't know what I would report, because we just really haven't gotten there with Department of Energy in all of these meetings where we still have a lot of questions and concerns. I think after we get some of this stuff figured out, we'd probably be happy to, to talk about it. I certainly would be happy at some point to, I guess, kind of fill you in. I want to say that the in area is a culturally significant area. This area is going to be very, very complicated to move through the process to get us to a point where we've got the final record of decision in ROD. And I'm not sure, I'm looking forward to seeing the documentation that they're doing, but it is going to slow up the process, because this is an extremely culturally sensitive area, and that is going to, that we have to deal with those impacts, and we really haven't started those conversations in a way that we need to at this point. So I'm happy to keep you posted on where we're at with it, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done, just to be blatantly honest with everyone.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. Just want to make sure you know that there is a space here to talk if you're ever interested to let us.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, I really want to share with you guys that both K and N are going to be complicated areas to get through. We already did a first round of comments, 2012 or something, with the K area. And then of course they've gone back now, and they've done a bunch of revisions, and they kind of reallocated how they were going to move forward on that. But those two areas are complicated, and Yakima Nation has a strong interest in those areas, and we have a lot of technical questions about what's going on in those areas. And so there is going to be a process. But I do want you to know, I mean, we're working with Department of Energy, EPA, and Department of Ecology on this. We've been actively having meetings to try and resolve some of our questions and some of our issues.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll stay tuned. Chris.
The other thing to realize too about the 100N area, it's interesting, but it's not just about strontium 90 and appetite barrier. There was a significant diesel fuel spill at some time in the past, and so diesel fuel is also contributing to contamination of groundwater there. And they do have an active remediation program for bioventing, and I think they're counting on in situ bioremediation a little bit. And while it's not perhaps as important as the strontium 90, it isn't interesting because it's very different from any other kind of contamination in groundwater here at Hanford.
Yeah.
So that's something that might be interesting as part of the general conversation about the 100N area.
And an interesting anecdote with that diesel spill, when it first happened and they realized there was a diesel spill, in order to stop the floating fuel from getting to the river, they dug a big trench. And the diesel sort of floated to the top of the trench and was stopped from getting to the river, but then it started building up in the trench. So once a week or so, they would burn this trench to get the diesel out of the water and then let it recharge and then burn it again. That's the 70s, I think, late 70s. And so a lot of the recovery was done that way, or the mass removal was done that way. And now the bioventing is a polishing step that I think they're just about done with active monitoring on the bioventing, and it's been pretty successful. But yeah, that's another, 100N has more than just strontium, and 100K has more than just hexchrome, and it's a pretty complex site. That's one of the few petroleum plumes that ends up on a map, though. Yeah, it's a good point. And we're trying to track down when DOE presented on the strontium barrier last, the appetite barrier last. I think it was in 2019.
It's looking like October 2019.
And I thought it was Elwood Rossbrenner who gave the presentation, but we can't find it on the agenda. So if I find the actual presentation, I'll pass it out. Anyone in queue online? Any other conversations, ideas, thoughts?
Next meeting is?
So that's, let's move on to the next agenda item.
I think it was like June 6th.
Yeah, so the next RAB meeting is June 6th on paper. On the work plan, we've got waste encapsulation and storage facility update, 100K area update. I heard Tom Tainer say that in a quarter, he'd be willing to come back and give a quick update on 324, maybe not a full brief, just where are they with the release or mapping. We have to do the work plan development for sure. We're hopefully going to have some draft advice to consider to pass out a committee on transuranics. So it's a pretty busy meeting already. What's missing? Is Wessex going to be right, Gary, you think?
Probably.
Okay.
I would actually go with the 324, probably in 6 months, rather than the next meeting. That way, if there's any of that characterization or additional work not done yet.
Yeah. Maybe at the end of the 100K, if there's something really exciting on 324, we can have one slide on it. Just so.
Yeah, I would go for that because actually 6 months will put us into the new work plan and into the new year. So
it sounds like Wessex is looking pretty likely. What about the 100K area?
I'll have to check on that one.
Yeah, maybe either 100K or 100N, whichever is more right, would be good for a discussion. Because I know I've been hearing from EPA that 100N is the next one on their radar. But there's obviously still conversations happening, and we don't want to get too far ahead of it because I want to let those conversations happen.
But they could report on what they've done so far, couldn't they?
Absolutely, and 100K has had a lot of remediation done, and the induced infiltration to get, enhanced infiltration to get the hexchrome out of the shallow soils has been really effective. So I'll hear about that every time someone wants to talk about it because it's really exciting.
Yeah. Well, and you had it in 2019, you had 2021. 100K keeps showing up on RAP agendas. I can't find 100N.
It was there once.
It was there once.
It's because we've not been able to get it scheduled.
We know we had a talk.
We just can't find it.
Yeah, it's in
It's buried in something that I haven't figured out yet.
It might have just been a slide or two in a 100K talk that just touched on 100 end, and I think that's probably what it is, but we'll dig and find it.
We'll dig.
But, yeah, so 100K and 100 N are the two river corridors operable units that don't have final records of decision yet, just so everybody knows. That's the last two holdouts. So.
How did you find it so?
Except for June, you've got WESA, 324 update and 100K or 100 N update.
324 light.
2013.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so that's why I just kind of said update, but yeah.
Yeah.
But that's why.
Did you also want to get a report on the 300 area?
So the other topics I think are gonna have to end up on the work plan for future meetings. Which that is, work plan development is locked in for June. We could start brainstorming some of the stuff now if we think it's worth doing today and not adjourning early, but, or we could do some folks can stick around and brainstorm and we can present it in June. I'm open for options. Because I think that's the only other thing
Yeah,
that we have.
so we've got a.
Chris, what's on your mind?
I have 3 items I'd like to see included somewhere in the future for discussion.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether it's time now or you want to do it after the meeting or what.
I mean, we've got the room until 5, but the meeting is supposed to end
Not
at
5.
2:30.
Oh, yeah,
So-
sorry, yeah, we have the meeting scheduled at 2:30, and I
Right.
actually have some other meetings at 3, so.
Okay, we have the meetings, the room till 2:30,
Yeah.
so if you can get it done in 30 minutes, then let's do it.
61811, I'd really like to see a presentation on 61811 to know what's going forward on that. And I'd be interested to know if DOE has come to any conclusions one way or another about PFAS. And then the third thing
And
is,
Chris, hold on, Chris,
Pardon?
explain what PFAS is.
Forever chemicals.
perfluoroalkyl substances.
Nice.
Whoa, you get the prize today.
Can you put that in context
that
now?
man
what
a
you're-
donut.
Yeah, can you put that in context, what you're asking for?
Which are basically small Teflon detergent fragments.
Well, the reason why is because it kind of popped up all of a sudden
Yeah.
into considerations of disposal and waste disposal and what we're doing with things. And DOE was just given the rules to go out and inventory it first, go figure out what you got out there before which time we try to do some rules on it. And I don't think that we've got any kind of, it's so recent, I don't imagine DOE's got anything yet.
Well, it's
There's
popped
a-
up nationally.
There's a
as
desktop
concern.
study.
Yeah, that's what I meant, nationally.
Yeah.
So there's a desktop review that's happening, EM-wide.
So it's a firefighting.
Firefighting foam and non-stick stuff. It started,
Teflon.
yeah, late 30s, early 40s, I think is the first appearance, which coincides with places that might have been built in the late 30s, early 40s, by the company that was inventing these chemicals.
Many of your non-stick cooking utensils
Yeah.
are coated with PFAS.
And we've got Mike Bergenbeil with you.
I can tell you that I'm aware that the Assistant Manager for Safety and Environment, Safety and Health Division has been working this. There have been funding discussions about their work to go proceed as directed from EM. So it is correct to say that it's an emergent issue and that we are working it.
And from the environmental professional side of the table, it is an extremely expensive analysis.
Yep.
And the rules for collecting the samples, like you have to be wearing all organic clothes, you can't use Sharpies, you can't, the clothes can't have been washed, and it's like, you almost have to sample for this stuff in the nude. It's awful because it's everywhere. It's pervasive in your blood and your clothing and everything. It touches everything. And the standards are like 7 parts per trillion.
Low parts per trillion.
And the detection limit's like 1 part per trillion. So it's like really hard to sample and there's no treatment for it yet. So what do you do when you find it? It's an interesting emerging contamination that EPA is starting to regulate more.
Get rid of your pants.
Exactly. Your pants.
And
All of the above. Rose, quick, jump in because we're disintegrating.
Well, I just was kind of curious. So when you're sampling for this, I actually, I live in Yakima, and I know that right now in Yakima County, out at the Yakima Firing Center, this is like a huge, huge deal, and people's wells are contaminated. And anyway, it's been a huge deal. But I'm kind of curious, when you're doing the sampling, are you then sampling both the soils and the groundwater? As well as surface waters and such? What's the sampling look like on that? Because I don't know.
It's emerging, so there's not a lot of good guidance out there. The primary exposure pathway is drinking water. So most of the sampling that's being done in the nation is water samples.
Okay, because I mean, obviously has to get to the water somewhere, and I know in the Sela area up here that there's a lot of wells that are contaminated, and people are having to use bottled water and such due to the contamination. But I'm just kind of wondering, do we know, does it, I realize this is kind of new, but I mean, is it something that is in the soils that is filtering down through the soil columns to getting into the groundwater for it to be affecting people's wells? I mean, to where it would be affecting the groundwater?
Yeah, it has to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
Full disclosure, I stopped being an environmental consultant just before this broke nationally, so I know how bad it was. But I also know that there's talk of opening new landfills in Oregon just to take soils contaminated with PFAS. So it must contaminate soils too.
Yeah, Rose, it was on the agenda for the trustee council in late 2019, early 2020.
It's still
I remember
there.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, we've been having a lot of conversations in the office about it and whatnot. And unfortunately, through all those conversations, I really kind of failed to really get a good understanding of what kind of sampling is being done and the level of sampling within the soil columns, because obviously that's where it's coming from. So anyway, thank you.
Chris,
I found a presentation from Dib Goswami, Department of Ecology, on May of 2015 about the appetite barrier. So
okay,
that's a little bit more recent, and I think I saw this.
All right. Yeah, maybe you can share that in the chat. Are you in the?
I could show it to Josh.
Chris, you had a third item?
Josh.
Wait a minute. So there's a comment from Mike.
He volunteered.
But EPA isn't here at the moment, so we'll have to
follow up.
We'll have to follow up with EPA and ask them if they would like to be voluntold.
Yeah, just a national what's coming down the pipe for PFAS, not bad drinking water.
Just tell them the hotel has been volunteered.
Don't do this to me.
Okay.
Chris, you have a
front
third
of the room.
Yeah, just one third thing. A lot of the major facilities still existing on the Central Plateau are in various stages of D4 or planning for D4. They're either the first D or the second D, but there's a lot of work in that area.
D4 is
deactivation, decommissioning, demolishment, and
decontamination and demolition.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
It would really be nice to see a timeline of all the major facilities there, where they are or where they are planned to be in this D4 process. Because there's a lot of work going on, there's a lot of money being spent on it in the yearly budgets, but I don't have a very good sense of where we are in any of those things or where we're going. It'd be nice just for clarity that if we could see a timeline.
That's the thing that I talked about in open forum, my vision that has the different periodic reports, it has the D4, it has the remediation timelines in different colors, and
who did it?
Nobody. It hasn't been done yet. That's what we're asking.
Yeah, but you know we love this wall.
I know, we could
do this wall.
We could do
Just
it.
saying.
We could have some fun one year.
But even the major facilities have all these outlying buildings and outbuildings, and they take the outbuildings first, and so it's kind of confusing because they're going in decontaminating some while they're demolishing others, and others are in intermediate stages.
And prepping some for demolition.
So let me ask, that falls under CARM.
That
So,
does.
It does, disposition of unused
It
facilities.
absolutely does.
Are you
So-
sure it's not infrastructure included?
it's interesting, but why does the Hanford Advisory Board need a presentation on it? Because it's not something we'd be doing advice on.
That's a good question, because it'll be
Well,
hard to
it-
find somebody who will give us the high-level policy advice.
It speaks to priorities, and it speaks to the balance of materials and ERDIC that EPA asked us to look at. Just planning to make sure you're not doing nothing but demo and not a lot of cleanup.
And why isn't EPA doing that study? That's their facility.
I'm sure they have a back of the envelope assessment, but the person scheduling the work is DOE, or the agency scheduling it. So yeah, that's what I'd like to see just for my own edification. I don't know if it's a HAB product or just to know, if nothing else, it would tell us this plant is scheduled for T4 in 20 years. The HAB doesn't need to really be concerned about it unless something happens for 15 years. You know, start looking at it 5 years in advance or something like that. So we're not, when we're brainstorming, keeping on bashing on, hey, why haven't we taken down Purex yet? Well, because Purex isn't coming down until 2050 or something, you know what I'm saying? We're not wasting our time or DOE's time.
When I first joined the HAB, there was a meeting, there was a lot of discussion about contaminated air filters in one of the buildings that was going on. Where's it gonna go? How contaminated is it? And that discussion went on for a couple meetings. And I think we gave some advice on that.
Yeah, the beef plant, non-time critical removal action.
Yeah, and so there could be similar issues going forward, maybe not, we don't know.
But we know that basement has been grouted, which was part of it, which is where the air filters were. But we don't have a schedule for when the B plant demolition and D4 work is gonna happen that moves those filters. So that's like, and I guess DNFSB will be the Defense Nuclear's Federal
Facility
Facility
Safety
Safety Board.
Defense Nuclear Facilities Safety Board.
So they're gonna be, they're in town, and some of us are meeting with the vice chair of that board tomorrow. So that might be something to talk about as something the RAP is interested in. But yeah, good topics.
Yeah, I guess, Pam, we just don't know whether there's an advice topic, whether it's something we should be interested or not. But if we learn a bit more about it, might say, yeah, we don't need to worry about it, or maybe there is something. But it's kind of an FYI type thing for us.
Helps us plan our bites if we know what's coming and how fast it's coming.
I'm just thinking about the work schedule that we were given versus what we thought like to do this year.
WTP.
And I think that's gonna happen again.
Yeah.
So tactically for June wrap, I've got
2.5 times.
four and a smidge things on the wish list. We've got WESF update that has medium to high confidence. I'm looking at Gary to see. We have a 100K update that DOE needs to check on. We have a 324 update request that's probably gonna be pushed out
6 months.
6 months.
Or one slide just to.
Yeah, Tom said he'd come in and.
In a quarter. So.
And I told him June,
Tom
was the next meeting, he said, okay,
And Tom doesn't even need a slide. If he's just able to call in and say.
this is where we are.
Yeah, that would
But
be
even
good.
third quarter starts in August.
And then work plan, looking forward to the leadership workshop and true draft advice. That's actually a pretty full meeting, guys.
Yeah, that'll be a good one.
That's a full meeting.
The other thing to consider, this type of thing that Chris had with the little knock list of ideas, bring that to June. If you're reading anything and you say, hey, that's something I'd like to learn more about, and the interest that I represent on the board is interested in learning about this topic and maybe advising the agencies, bring it and we'll talk it through, and I'll try to get it on the work plan for the committee. June could be the last wrap meeting, depending on how April goes, so maybe we should plan a lunch to commiserate and kick off to the new committee.
Well, there is a RAP meeting on the schedule for September 12th.
There is, I don't look ahead.
Yeah, September 12th, infrastructure
So
updates.
September.
RAP 2.
Yeah.
September, we should have a kickoff meeting for the,
For CARM.
yeah, a passing of the torch meeting.
Okay, and to be a total wet rag, that committee week in September now overlaps one of the traditional national meetings in September. Help me, Pam.
The National Cleanup Workshop.
That's
Yeah,
that's gonna happen every year. We just move committee week, that's all.
Yeah, well, no, just so you know, at the moment, they're all on the same week.
Yeah, and they always are.
We'll
I
have to
don't know
move
how that
that,
happens.
but, so that'll be the time for the party, not June, although we can have a festive
You can have
lunch
a
in
practice party and then the real party.
June. Dry run, so to speak.
Anyway, thank you, Pam. I can never remember which one.
Okay. Any other comments, suggestions, ideas, discussions for the good of the order?
I can't believe you gave that to me.
Very expensive.
Is Rose, are you still in queue? You're in queue again. Jump in.
Yeah, I am in queue again. So I apologize, but I ended up missing a good portion of the meeting yesterday because I got called to chambers, tribal council chambers for a meeting. And so I did miss that. And if could somebody give me the quick nickel tour as far as you're saying that the RAP committee is no longer going to exist? The name is basically going to be changed to something else. Could somebody just kind of fill me in on what happened with that and what to expect? I would really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So at the committee of the whole, the group came up with, I'm going to say 4.5 committees moving forward that are going to be, the details are going to be polished a little bit and will be presented at the April full board meeting for consideration for consensus. Those committees that have been proposed so far are as yet, the name is unrefined, but something with tanks and waste treatment. A cleanup and risk mitigation committee, which is CARM, which is where RAP sort of migrates to. A engagement.
Community and
outreach and engagement committee, which sort of takes the torch from PIC. And then a future land use, infrastructure and disposal committee, which takes on HSEP infrastructure and landfills and that type of thing. So that will all be spoken about in depth in the April full board meeting. And, but the general consensus is the committee leadership would probably carry over to the next committee until the next election. So more details to follow.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
And Rose, you heard that we're going to be meeting in Yakima in April?
I did not, but now I know.
Okay, yes. The board
What
meeting.
Is the date? What is the date for the April meeting? My April is so busy.
19 and 20.
Oh.
We're meeting at the Red Lion down by the convention center in the middle of Yakima.
Yeah, no, okay, I will be here for that then, so I will definitely be in person at that meeting. Super, thank you.
Look forward to seeing you.
Is that
Larry?
Hey, we'll obviously get notification of that meeting beforehand so we can get registered.
Information for travel, hotel reservations and stuff will come out tomorrow afternoon in the weekly update.
Okay, great. Well, thank you.
Is that meeting gonna be a, start at noon, go to 8 the first day, and then the second day start at 9, go to noon?
My current Ouija board tells me it's gonna be more like a 9 a.m. start to 4 or 5 p.m. finish. It doesn't look, I'm looking at Gary, it doesn't look like it's gonna have an evening session as of right now.
Yeah, we're still working on the agenda, so.
Watch this space.
But for a public meeting in an outside area, it might be good to try to consider an after-hours meeting just to see if the public would respond to that.
Like I said, we haven't gotten that far yet, so we're still working that.
Yeah.
Considering many different options.
So many people work who might be interested to come.
So I was
Yeah.
bringing that up because if it was gonna be after evening, can we set up maybe, get, Yakima to give us a tour of maybe one of their facilities? And
There are a number of ideas cooking that we haven't figured out how to fully bake yet.
Okay.
So that'll be an EIC conversation for sure, I'm assuming.
Right,
I like the bird place.
Yeah.
That's just.
Hey, Rose, did you hear that?
He wants to go someplace he's already been.
I couldn't quite make it out. What was it that you guys are volunteering us for?
You have a number of programs there. You have your sturgeon program and your aviary one where you help birds get better.
We even have where the buffalo roam.
I really like the birds.
Sign me up, Rose. I'm all about buffalo.
Rob loves the birds.
And the birds.
So are you thinking of if we did well, I was just gonna kind of make the suggestion too, if we do end up doing kind of going into the evening part of the, if we kind of go that way, definitely want to know, because we would certainly send an announcement out, through Yakima Nation, and maybe we even have our person from the Yakima Nation Review attend and that type of thing. So, for the public portion of our meeting. So it would be good to know enough ahead of time as far as like what we want to plan for that, number one. And then if people want to do some kind of an activity, then Lorraine's really good about getting the contacts in and setting up some kind of a tour or something, if whatever folks might be interested in to be able to do that. Absolutely. I mean, we also have our cultural center, and I will say this: if people have not attended and gone through our cultural center and museum, that that's also equally interesting too, if for just kind of an overview of Yakima Nation culture. So there's a lot of options.
Awesome. So we will definitely get more details to you through the EIC and leadership and DOE before we have the meeting.
Yeah, I'm sure we can arrange something if folks want to do. So yeah, just let us know and we can kind of get the timing down, and then we can and obviously kind of get a general idea of what the interest would be, and then that way we can hopefully set something up.
Awesome.
Yeah, the only thing I recommend is, for those that travel a lot, will already do it, which is basically get your hotel room booked. There is a block put aside, but call and make your hotel room reservation, and that way it's one less thing you have to worry about. Right?
And in the interest of those folks who have a drive this afternoon, is there anything else for the good of the order related to the River and Plateau Committee? Everybody online, thank you for attending and sitting through a hybrid meeting, which I don't know if I'm moving yet, but I'm not moving. I've been stuck in the same place for the past 3 hours. But thank you for watching my picture, and thank you for joining the conversation.
Yeah, you're kind of on tilt there.
Yeah,
So are you adjourning now? You wish to adjourn?
Yeah, Mr. DDFO, would you please adjourn us?
You're adjourned.
Thank you.
Easy.
Simple and sweet. Take care, everybody.